Change of landscapes outside the window, kaleidoscope of new faces, communication with a variety of people. This is the ride on a long-distance train. That's why a lot of people love traveling the road. But for Emily, it's a job. She is a conductor on such a train. And for her, the road is a separation from her young son, taking care of passengers and troubles. Sometimes problems, sleep deprivation, but pleasure too. Of course, the clatter of wheels sometimes brought sad thoughts about her son. She longed, thinking how he was growing up without her. Where to go if you could not get a good education because of early marriage, a decent job, close to home cannot find. From the marriage left only a son and Penny's alimony. I have to live on something, as there is no one to rely on. The only soulmate is Trixie's sister, but she has enough problems of her own. So most of the help is moral. So I went to the railroad. It's a good salary, and you can always work part-time. And the work is interesting, not so hard. It's not like her mom had to lay ties. That was work. So the poor woman didn't live long enough to reach 50. And the work of a conductor is nothing compared to that. And problems, well, there are problems everywhere. That's what work is. Where can you go without it? In general, their whole family was connected with the railroad. Father was a machinist, too, all over the country, so he was rarely seen at home. Mother also considered her marriage a failure, whether there is a husband or not, but my sisters loved my father. His arrival was always a holiday, but he left early too. In fact, the failed marriage, of course, had done a lot of blood to Emily Tighe, and everything else was forgivable. But the fact that the house, which his own grandmother Emily bequeathed to Emily, sued, that's what he seriously failed. I mean, she thought she was going to have a place to live. And not just a house, but a plot of land with a vegetable garden and outbuildings. How much effort she put into it. How she loved this house and her grandmother and mother-in-law. God rest her soul, before her death she said, "I bequeath everything to you, Emily, to you and your Johnny. That bastard Greg won't get anything. He'll be wasted anyway. He's such a piece of junk. He's just like his father. You'd better chase him off while you're young. You'd need a good man, and you'd be all right." And so she did, writing a will for Emily soon after the death of Greg, whom she had long suspected of cheating, in the same house, and caught Emily with his mistress. So I decided to fulfill my grandmother's wishes. Break up. I could kick him out. But he didn't. He went with some documents and certificates to Sheikh to prove that his grandmother, Annie Igorovna, was not in her last years, and Emily, almost with a knife to her throat, forced her grandmother to write such a will. That was my own grandmother, my late mother's mother. It is clear that she wanted to leave me the house, and this snake, while I was at work, abused my grandmother, so she forced her. And how much effort and money have I put into this house? My ex-wife only knows how to walk, so now Emily and her son had to rent an apartment, and that too without work and part-time jobs nowhere. And there was no hope to save up for some housing of their own, because you have to pay for rent and hire a nanny to look after your son while she was on a trip, not to mention the fact that you have to live on something. That's the way it is. On the next voyage, she immediately sensed that there would be trouble. At the station, a pregnant woman entered the carriage, and her husband saw her off. You look, as if something did not happen, she thought unhappily, seeing how the woman's husband drags and places the luggage. In parting, he admonished his wife. "Here you go, Stacy. A separate compartment. You'll have a smooth ride. Call me as soon as you get there. Say hello to everyone for me. And here are the presents. Remember what's for whom. And call me right away. Don't forget." And he didn't forget to address Emily. "My wife is pregnant, as you can see. Please, please be careful. I don't know what's going on. I'll be very grateful." And he slipped a few bills into his pocket. "Thank you for that, of course. But it's the fact that Johnny's sending him out with a belly like that and no escort. He realizes that anything can happen, but he says, 'Go on, dear. Say hello. And in case of what happens, who's to blame? The conductor. They'll remember that you paid for it. Oh, those men, you put your treasure in the car and goodbye and goodbye. And if you reproach them, they'll make big eyes saying, what's the big deal? They used to give birth in the fields. You should try it yourself, at least in the field. At least in the forest." Emily thought unhappily, remembering in passing the courses of guides. But what courses were there? Just a few classes, one of which talked about first aid and childbirth, but few people listened. Everyone laughed more, and the teacher herself reassured such cases are very rare. Besides, there is bound to be at least one doctor or nurse in your carriage or in a neighboring one, so let's hope that everything will be all right for you. Let's hope so, Emily decided. The train touched down, rolling along. She looked in on a particular passenger, offered coffee or tea, asked how she was doing and feeling. "Don't worry, everything is fine. I don't need anything yet," the woman smiled. The face was indeed calm. Nothing portended trouble. Emily, having calmed down, went about her business. But could one cause for concern be dismissed? The next station added to the strangeness. Emily saw an elderly man trying to board the train. He tried one carriage, no luck, and then he got to her. Not only was he without a ticket, but he was blind. Well, you can't let the blind go without an escort. It's like everyone's conspiring today. Pregnant or disabled, she thought. Clothed, obviously not very well, but clearly not a vagrant. A clean, pleasant face, about 60 years old. "I didn't have time to take a ticket, but I have money. I'll pay," he asked. "Why are you alone?" Emily asked. "I don't have anyone to escort me. I haven't had time to hire anyone either." She couldn't refuse, so she let him in. And only then did she gasp. No seats. In one compartment there were, but there was a mother with 3 children, where they could not take another one, and even a blind one. The other compartments are not the same. Her partner took her aside. "What are you doing, Emily? It's not enough that you have one pregnant woman who's about to give birth. You let this one in too." It was such a quiet flight. No drunks, no company. But no, you're just going to get in with your mercy. What if there's an inspection? Come on, if anything, blame it on me. I can't throw such a man off the train. And what a weather. Look, it's starting to rain again. Don't we have no conscience at all? How can an already unfortunate man freeze on the platform? But she quickly realized that the pregnant woman was traveling alone in the compartment, and here Grandpa is quiet, clean, calm, will sit in a corner. He can't see anything, but he won't be noticed. "Let's go," she took him by the elbow. "I'll make you comfortable." "What station are you going to?" "Who are you going to?" Grandpa named the destination, said that he was going to go on to his son. "Why doesn't he see you off?" Emily wondered. "I'll meet you there," the passenger sighed. "What's your name?" "Archie. You can just call me Uncle Erich," he grinned. His face was tense, suggesting he was blind as a result of some misfortune, not born that way. Emily peeked into the compartment at the pregnant woman. "Hello again. Ellen, sorry. I didn't recognize your middle name." "It should just be Ellen. What's the middle name?" The passenger smiled again. "I'm fine. Don't worry. The deadline hasn't come up yet. It's just that I have 2. So much for the big belly." Emily sighed to herself, but spoke of something else. "I'm sorry, Ellen. We have this thing." And she explained the problem of a blind grandfather who simply had no place to put him. "Why don't you take Archie as your traveling companion?" Ellen was even nicer than she seemed. "Yeah, sure. Let him go. Do I mind? I don't think we'll be in each other's way." That's how well it all came together. They'll both get there without a problem. Matthew shouldn't worry. Grandpa's really nice. You can see he's intelligent. White, clean hands, thin fingers. Maybe he's a musician. They say blind people have good hearing, but I don't know what happened to him. It's not Emily's job to figure it out. The main thing is that she didn't take the sin on her soul, didn't leave the unfortunate man in trouble at the station. She would have suffered herself if she had refused. Everything was really quiet from then on, and in general in the carriage and in the compartment where there were passengers, inspiring anxiety. Emily looked in on them, offered tea and snacks, but the lady had all her own, and the blind passenger politely refused everything, and indeed sat on the edge of the bunk, like a shadow. "So at least have some sweet tea. Why sit like this?" "All right, I won't refuse tea," he replied, but that was the end of all his requests. There were no stops during the night, no problems or accidents either. And Emily was about to decide that she could take a nap when some frightened girl knocked on the compartment door. "Oh, do you have a connection here?" There is an uncle, blind, says that an ambulance is needed, or at least a doctor. Something's happened there. I didn't realize it was water. Emily had just realized what the water was. She found her partner, told him to radio the trainmaster and announce that a doctor was needed. And she herself rushed into the compartment to the pregnant woman and the blind man, inwardly lamenting, "Oh, the problem is hard. You have to go to the station. You can't wait. She'll give birth. I wish there was a doctor or someone else." In the compartment moaned, clutching the corner of the pillows with her teeth. Ellen Archie soothed her. "Don't be nervous. It doesn't happen that fast. Help will come. The main thing is to calm down and listen to me. Uncle Erich, I still have 2 weeks to walk. It hurts. Help." She looked hopefully at the guide who looked in. "It's all right. They'll make an announcement now, find a doctor, and everything will be fine. How are you doing here? Are you having contractions or something?" "Yes, but I'm afraid we won't get to the station." "A quick labor," the man said softly, soothingly. "And in the meantime, get what you need ready. Clean underwear of some sort. There's a first aid kit, isn't there?" "I've got everything. I'll get it all right away." Emily marveled at Archie's calm, confident tone. He sounded like an experienced doctor might give orders, even if he'd been a professor 3 times before. What's the use of that now? The poor guy can't see, she thought, as she took what she needed. She returned to the compartment, where things, by all appearances, were already going to labor. Now someone will come," she said confusedly, as she watched Archie's sensitive hands examine the laboring woman. "Well, while we wait, you, Emily, sanitize your hands for both you and me. Not everyone here wants to wait," he said sternly, surprising the conductor again. "Open up. It's coming soon." Alone on his feet. "And how do you know? Are you a doctor?" asked the astonished Emily. "Yes, I used to be a surgeon. But I used to deliver babies, too. Still had eyes, though." "Let's try it blind. You'll have to be my eyes and hands." "Oh, Mommy. I don't know how to do anything." Emily was afraid, but she pulled herself together so she could do it. "The main thing is to listen to me." There was no doctor or anyone related to medicine in the whole train. And Emily, on shaky legs and drenched in sweat, had to deliver a baby for the first time in her life, and not a simple one. It was multi-layered. Later, Annie herself could not remember what and how she did, but there were 2 new people in the compartment, boys alive and well and screaming loudly. They were placed on the chest and belly of their mother, who, in a joyful voice, forgetting pain and fear, began to give thanks. "Thank you. Thank you so much." Emily, crying loudly and laughing with happiness and relief, sat down next to her, holding the babies. She loved them so much, as if she had given birth to them herself. "It's you 2 who are my saviors. I would have died without you. 2 badger boys, I would have given them your names." "No, you wouldn't. A boy could be Emily too. So there will be Archie and Emily," the mother said in a weak, happy voice. "Oh, what am I if it hadn't been for Uncle Erich? I couldn't have done it. I had no idea what to do," Emily sobbed. "You're a good boy, Archie. Your eyes don't see, but your hands remember everything. You must have been a good doctor." "It's been a long time," the man sighed, also wiping away a tear. The door to the compartment opened ajar. The second conductor, without going in, asked, "Well, what's up there?" "Everybody's alive." "Who was born?" Alive. We have 2 boys." "Come in and see," Emily replied. "Come on, what's there to see?" "I was afraid to pick mine up anyway. I just came by to tell you we're pulling into the station and there's an ambulance waiting. They'll take you to the hospital right away." "I won't forget you. And my husband will thank you. I'll tell everyone how you saved me and my children." Helen hurried away. "Here's my cell phone. Don't lose it. Give me yours, too." "Don't worry. We're interested in how your boys will grow up," too, Emily assured her. The young mother and her children were dropped off at the station and taken to the maternity hospital. Emily gathered Archie into her compartment and poured tea. "Yes, and adventures on the road," she said. "And really, if it hadn't been for you, it would have been a disaster for Ellen and her boys. As it is, they are all alive and well. God willing, they will grow up to be good people. We'll be here soon. I live in the same town. Will your son meet you? I want to meet him at the cemetery. He's dead. We had an accident. He's gone. I went blind. I wish I had died right away, too, the passenger replied, pounding his fist on his knee. Oh, that's how it is. Well, if you had died, 3 more could have died today. But you see, you're alive, so you're needed. You survived here for a reason. Since we're going to the same city, my flight's ending. I'll take you to the cemetery. Okay? Don't you have any family at all? Emily felt sorry for this elderly and apparently very nice man in such a difficult situation. That's the thing. No one. I used to be fine. Now I wasn't just a good doctor. I had my own clinic. I was making money. I did something stupid. I married a young woman. My wife is Wolin's mother. Our son died a long time ago, and then this happened to us. Wolin was gone. I was between life and death for a long time, and then it turned out I wouldn't be able to see anymore. And while I was in that state, Yuji took over the clinic, and somehow she turned it around so that she turned all the people against me. Don't ask. I don't know how. So now all I have left is my son's grave, so I went to see him. And then, well, yes, there are people there, maybe Archie said calmly, as if he'd been through something long ago. What's the matter with you? I don't know what you're up to, but you can't do that. Emily didn't know how to comfort her new acquaintance, but she realized that he was really going through a hard time. Why don't you stay at my place for a while? Go to the cemetery, stay a while, and then we'll see. We still need to know how ours are doing. Their mom's good, Vincent, and it's good that she met you. You'd make a good medic, by the way. And don't worry, I'm not going to end my life. At least not in a way that's going to upset or scare or set anyone up. I don't listen to what I'm saying. Once in town, Emily took Archie to her place, introduced him to her son, and soon they were driving to the cemetery. On the way, he talked about Voland, who also became a doctor, worked in the clinic of his father, and gave great hopes. What a pity. He probably would have saved a lot of lives, too, Emily sighed. Yes, he followed in my footsteps, but the path was shorter, and the worst thing is that in his personal life, I think he repeated my failures in many ways, Archie sighed. He didn't get married in time, though something was going to happen, and even more than once. He wasn't young anymore, but he was secretive. I only introduced him to my first girl. It was right after high school. My mother and I were against early marriage, but they didn't really want to be together without us. They split up. I don't know why. It was the same for me. I split up with my first sweetheart, with my wife Voland's mom. I lived like that, out of obligation, for my son's sake, and so that I wouldn't be alone. Then she died, and I got involved with that old fool Eugenie, and I was alone. That's what I should do. The cemetery, of course. Emily helped Archie find the grave. She led him to a bench. I'll be out of your way. You sit here and talk to him, and I'll be right over here. When you get up, we'll go, she said. Thank you, Vincent. What would I do without you? I don't know, Archie answered. Emily stepped back and wandered between the graves, reading the inscriptions on the monuments and wiping away tears. She felt sorry for the lonely old man. Pity for those who lay beneath the ground, and for those who left inscriptions on the stone to testify to their grief. Glancing from time to time at Archie's slumped form, she suddenly noticed that a boy, small like her son, was coming up behind him. Well, that is, about 6 or 7 years old. In his hands he held an inexpensive bunch of artificial flowers. The man must have heard his footsteps and looked back. Emily also hurriedly approached and heard the conversation. Who is here? Grandfather asked. No, I'm Erich, said the boy. I just came to visit the grave. That's right. That's my dad. Who's that? Archie put his hand on the monument. Yeah, that's what my mom told me. We used to come here together. Can't you see it at all? Did you come to see him too? The little boy asked with childish curiosity. I am his daddy. Where is your mom, and who is she? What's her name? My mom's name is Maggie, but she's in jail now, and I was in an orphanage and escaped. And since you're my daddy's daddy, that makes you my grandfather. Why don't you take me out of the orphanage? I can live with you, and help you." Tears were ringing in the child's voice. Emily, her heart breaking with pity at the scene, came closer and asked, "What's going on here, Vincent?" "I don't know. I think I found my grandson Archie," replied Maggie. "Yeah, I remember my son had a girl like that, but I never saw her. All I heard was them talking on the phone. And then I don't know what happens next. I don't know how to make sense of it all. Is it really true? What am I supposed to do with all this?" Archie was confused. Emily was, too. She shifted her gaze from the boy to the photograph of the dead young man and saw that there was a resemblance, but it would be premature to draw any conclusions from that alone. And anyway, what could be done with all this? "So, well, friends, let's go home and tell each other all about it. And I'm getting a little cold standing here, too." "You're not dressed for the weather," Eric said Emily. "I ran away from the orphanage in the summer." "They didn't give me a jacket then," the boy said cheerfully. "Was it that bad in the orphanage? Did they insult you? Everyone cares about you. Now you'd stay warm and go to school," Emily wondered. "It's bad. I don't want to live there. I don't go to school, I can't go. I already know a lot, and I can count as much as I want, and read, and in general. But I don't want to go to the orphanage. It's disgusting." Eric frowned and turned the conversation away. "Grandfather, how do you go if you can't see?" "Well, I do not sit all day. I have a cane, see? I know where I can step and where I shouldn't. And now Aunt Emily's still around. Aunt Emily doesn't have enough to worry about. Now she's got you." Emily thought, who really had little idea how she would be with her grandfather and grandson. She has to go on trips. And where would those go? The boy to the orphanage, so he'll run away again. The grandfather, even if it is possible to prove that they are related people. The guardianship, of course, will not give. He himself needs a guardian. In short, she takes on an impossible burden, but at least a few days will stay. She'll dress them up. She has extra clothes. The boy seemed to guess her thoughts, and as they approached the house, he tugged at her sleeve. "Aunt Emily, will you help me and Grandpa? I'd like to live with him." "I'll try, buddy. I just don't know what I can do," she said. Archie understood her concern, too. He sighed heavily, realizing that there was little he could do to help a lonely woman with a lot of problems of her own. At home, Emily introduced the boys, sat the guests at the table, fed them. She listened to the guest's story about being an orphan. "My mom and I had a good life. I'm telling you the truth. We had a nice apartment. I even had my own room, and my mom had her own. She worked and got money, and we had everything. And then some people came. My mom said they were liars. They took the apartment and said something about my mom, that she was a criminal. So they took her away. And when we said goodbye, she promised she'd come back and that I'd wait for her. She also told me not to believe she was a criminal. That's it." "And when was that, Eric?" Emily asked. "I don't remember much. I was 4 years old, and now I'm 6. "So you remember your daddy then?" Archie asked. "Not well. He used to come over and give us toys, and then my mom told me he was dead. We used to go to the cemetery with her." I remembered. Yes, the boy's memory was not bad, but in legal matters, what could he understand even now, even 2 years ago? Emily sighed heavily. "I don't know what I'm supposed to do with all this. Do you remember your address?" "Eric, I would go there. Ask something. How?" "Oh, there's no point," Archie replied. "The new owners must have the apartment. That's all it is, black realtors. I should know better than to know I'd been ripped off by one of those guys. Maggie, too. I don't know why Wolin never told me anything about her and her son. Only Maggie herself can tell me that." The old man pondered. "You'll get my mom out of jail. It's really not her fault." Honestly, tears welled up in Eric's eyes. "We understand." Baby Emily stroked his head. "I'm going to go look at the apartment, see if I can find out anything from the neighbors." "I think we should go to other people," Archie said firmly. "Ellen, this is the woman who gave birth. She said she was grateful that her husband would always help her. I don't like to ask for gratitude, and I don't like to demand gratitude for services rendered, but this is a special case. Do you think there's anything he can do to help?" Emily asked. I have no idea. But we don't even know what kind of person he is, where he works. Maybe just a rich businessman. But we don't need the money. Well, maybe he's influential in some areas. Can he at least help us find out how Maggie got locked up and what happened to the apartment? Or at least tell us who to go to? Is there anything we can do on our own? What are we now? We're nobody. So, do you still have the phone numbers Ellen gave you? All right, let's call her, tell her what our problems are. Emily dialed Ellen's number, but the phone was silent. Well, obviously she's still in the hospital with 2 babies. No conversation at all. Only in the evening did she manage to contact her casual acquaintance, on whom she had pinned so much hope, only to be completely disappointed. It's okay, Ellen said in a sad, downcast tone. The kids are fine. So am I, but I'm thinking of divorcing my husband. Why? Why all of a sudden? I thought things were going well between you two. Oh, it wasn't fine. Is it good when a husband sends his pregnant wife on a train? I've been thinking about it here at the hospital. Why did he do that? Didn't he realize that I might die? That the children might not survive? Lucky you and Archie were there. What if I hadn't? Is that what you think now? Is he sitting next to me, begging for forgiveness or something? No, he hasn't even been here once. He's got things to do, you see. So I told him, mind your own business and I'll mind my own. And she cried. But why so wide open? Emily tried to reason with her. There must be an explanation for everything. He has a million explanations, but it doesn't make me feel any better. And anyway, we had a fight. I told him I was going to name the kids after you, and he didn't want to do it. He said he wanted to name them after our fathers, Igor and Victor. And he said it was wrong to name a boy after a girl. She's probably right about that. Archie has a grandson named Erich after him. Maybe they'll name a granddaughter after me. I can't fight with my husband over something like that.
Yes, you laugh. But Ellen was very serious and was not going to make up with her husband.
So it was even awkward to address her with her requests in such a case. Well then, that hope is gone, Emily realized. Since this husband was no longer in Ellen's life, he was hardly going to help us. And why should he? It's not like it's just some sum of money. The next day, seeing no other way out, she went to the address that Erich had given her, to his former apartment. Emily didn't know what she wanted to find there. Emily just wanted to look into the eyes of the people who had taken away the only place to live from a single mother and her son, and who were probably responsible for her imprisonment. She hoped to learn at least some details that might help with Maggie's release. After all, if she had to ask for help from powerful people, it was better to know the ins and outs of the case. Should I talk to the neighbors or something? She thought. But what she found out was completely unexpected. The door to the apartment was opened at her call by none other than Greg, her ex-husband. Emily? Is this where you found me? He said with a mocking smile. What do you want from me now? Is the alimony too low again? Or what? What are you doing in this apartment? How did you get in here? I got here the right way. I walked in the door, and now this is my apartment. I sold my grandmother's house. You know, I don't want to be in the garden. Now I'm a city dweller. What do you want from me? I need to know how you got this apartment. You took the house from me and my son, and now another woman has it, and you put her in jail. How did you do it? Why do you want to know? As an exchange of experience, tired of serving tea and coffee to passengers and dirty laundry for the 3rd time to sell people. Her ex-husband continued to mock her. This and the other woman should not flap their ears. Think about themselves and their child. Now let her sit, think. And a little such is not harmful. I may be tired of being a conductor, but I've never framed other people, and I never will. And I didn't set you up. But it wouldn't hurt to bring her out in the open. Remember that. Emily turned around and left, not really knowing how she could fulfill her threat. Of course, you could report it to the police, but while they're sorting it out. With such sad news, Emily went home, thinking about what to do next, and on whom she would leave the blind grandfather and his little grandson, while she herself will be on a voyage. If she asked for a nanny, she'd ask for twice as much money, which she didn't have. And if she called Trixie's sister, she'd probably refuse to do her own thing, too. There was still hope that Archie would think of something. After all, he hadn't always just been a blind invalid. He'd worked in a clinic once, probably saved someone's life. He must have had some acquaintances who may have heard some bad things about him, but they'd still remember him as someone who'd helped. But she had no time to tell the news at home. As soon as Emily entered the room, there was a phone call from Ellen this time. She was much more cheerful. "Emily, hello. Excuse me, please. You called last time, probably to say something, and I started complaining to you instead. But you're not angry, are you?" "Of course I'm not angry, Eleanor, but I understand your problems have been solved. You and your husband are reconciled," Emily rejoiced. "We have." He explained everything to me. Turns out he was building a house, and he decided to finish it completely so that I and the children could move there from the maternity hospital. So now we're in a new house. You could call it a palace. Vincent's with me right now. He'll talk to you. He wants to thank you and Archie too. He's with you. Yeah, our doctor's here. There's a man on the phone. Hello, Emily, this is Vincent Timofeyevich. Can I call you Vincent? I'm the husband. Ellen told me everything. I can't tell you how grateful I am. The doctors at the hospital said it went exceptionally well. Even they couldn't have done better. You have really good hands, and that Archie too.
Oh no. We couldn't leave a woman without help, but all the credit goes to him. He's the doctor. I'm just an assistant. He told me what to do, and I listened to him, Emily explained.
And you did a wonderful job helping my babies come into the world. Thank you so much. I'd really like to meet you both and see if there's anything you need. You know, you can't let something like that go unappreciated. I was just calling. I'm sorry. But that's exactly why Emily said, struggling to find the words, you see. We need help, not money, not material help. I'd like to ask if there are any good lawyers among your acquaintances. Maybe lawyers or, I don't know, someone else. Because Archie and his grandson are in serious trouble. Of course, I'll find you any kind of professional help you need, free of charge. Don't worry about that, Ellen's husband assured her seriously. But it is necessary to meet to find out more about what is bothering you. Emily gave her address and told him when she could be at home. And Archie's staying with me now, too. So we're all here. Oh, and my wife told me she wanted to name the kids after you. And don't even think about it. What's the big deal? Don't worry about it. I think Ellen's changed her mind, too. Vincent arrived the same evening with a lawyer. He listened to the whole story of both the boy and Archie. Apparently, the boy's mother was victimized by the same con artist we've been looking for. Now we'll have something to go on. Don't worry, they'll be held accountable for what they've done. I just wish we could figure out why Maggie went to juvie. I don't think she really did anything wrong. We'll figure that out, too. Once we've started, we've got to keep going. Don't worry. It's a complicated case, but we'll solve it, because there are plenty of victims out there. You're saying your ex-husband was involved? The lawyer was asking around. He was. He also took away the house from me and my son, which our grandmother bequeathed to us. It was obviously illegal, but I couldn't prove anything. I don't know enough, and I don't have any connections. And he brought in some man, apparently with an education. So my son and I were left without a roof over our heads. By the way, my son needs to go to school and to the clinic. Do not worry. Everything will be done according to the law, said the lawyer. And the case began. An additional investigation was launched into why a woman with a young child had her apartment taken away and why she had been convicted. And this time the law was on the side of the deceived. Emily's ex-husband was on trial. Of course, the house could not be returned. It has long been sold, but she was able to get the money for it. But Erich and his mom got their apartment back, and Maggie herself was also released from prison. After a review of the case, it turned out that her accusation was completely false, and soon the happy mother was already hugging her son and thanking Emily and her father-in-law. How could it be, Maggie, Archie asked. And why didn't I know anything about you or Erich? Volan and I had a fight. It was a silly excuse, of course, but it couldn't be helped. It was a big fight, so we broke up. It was my fault, too. I loved him, but I couldn't help myself. I was so worried about it. and then I found out that Wolin had died. But even then, it was too late to contact you. Besides, I was embarrassed. You were a serious man then, a rich owner of a clinic. I had no education, no profession. I thought I'd come to you after Volin's death and you'd just kick me out. You'd think I was some kind of fraud, but I'm not. The son is really his. I almost left Erich an orphan because of some stupidity. Archie said reproachfully. What's wrong with your arm? He gently felt his sister-in-law's elbow. Yes, I worked at a sawmill in prison. I made a big mess of it. At first I thought it was nothing and there was no one to treat it, but when I turned to them, they said it would be fine. Anyway, my arm doesn't hurt much. It just can't bend all the way, she said. Probably surgery can be done and everything will not be so difficult, said the former doctor. I don't really care about my arm or anything else. The main thing is that I'm home, that Erich is with me, and we have a place to live. Maybe you'll move in with us. Please, Archie. You're the closest thing we have to family now. Oh, this is awkward. There's not much choice, though, Grandpa said. There's nowhere to live. All I have left after my wife's shenanigans is a room in a communal apartment. It's almost impossible to live there. The neighbors won't let me. And isn't your lawyer, who solved my case so cleverly, will not help? How can you be so traumatized and left with nothing? I don't know, Maggie. Maybe it will, maybe it won't. That's the last thing on my mind today. I'm happy. I've got my grandson, I've got you. And if you can find a corner in your apartment, that'd be great. And I won't be redundant. That's for sure. I think I'll find a job, and you'll be very useful to us. Look after my grandson. Look, Archie grinned. Oh, I'm sorry, it's just a habit. I mean, at least you'll be around. It's like a child without supervision. Well, Maggie was embarrassed. Erich and I are real friends now, Archie reassured her.
And with us, too, with me and Gianni, Emily reminded him.
We're not blood relatives, but we're not strangers to each other. And you, Maggie, if you're looking for a job, why don't you come to us as a conductor? We need people all the time. It's not the easiest job in the world, but it's good money. I'd love to. I've been in this damn prison so much. It'd do me good to travel now. That's good, of course. But I tell you, Emily, you'd make a great medic, said Archie. Oh, I wouldn't be a medic. Not unless you're always there to tell me what to do. But in general, I listen to you. I read books on first aid. I don't have time to learn much, but in case of emergency, I won't sit idly by when someone helps me with something. I can do a lot of things myself. Things happen on the road. But before Maggie could get a job, she had to sort out her hand. She was referred for surgery. But it was more complicated than first thought. She stayed in the hospital a little longer than she expected. Emily visited her, and one day, to her amazement, saw on the nightstand a picture of her father next to a woman and a little girl on his lap. Who were those people? She asked. Where did you get that picture? How could I? It's me as a little girl. Didn't you recognize me? Those are my parents, Maggie replied. They're dead now, but I always carry the picture with me. That can't be. That's my father, Emily exclaimed. And when you were born, it turned out there wasn't that much difference in their ages. Maggie had always lived in this town. Emily grew up in the country. I have an older sister, Trixie, also his daughter. I don't see how it could be that he's yours and ours, Emily wondered. It's very simple, I think, said Maggie. He worked on the railroad and traveled all the time. He must have been staying at your place or ours for 2 families. It happens. Yeah, I'll say. That's our daddy, and I never knew it. My mom must have known. I've heard them fight about it. Sometimes Emily remembered. Well, you see, mine used to resent him for coming so seldom and for being away so long. I wonder, Maggie wondered. So suddenly it turned out that they really are sisters by father. Maggie met Trixie, her husband and 2 children, so it was quite a family. Meanwhile, the fate of Archie and Erich was decided. They were able to prove their kinship, and the grandfather settled Lucy at his failed daughter-in-law. Nor was the acquaintance of Helen and Vincent and their sons Viti and Gorko, with whose help they came into the world, interrupted. It was interesting to watch the little ones grow up. The mutual appreciation of the adults made it hard to forget each other. Maggie recovered, got a job as a conductor, and they began to travel together with Emily. They became real sisters, and when they finished their business, often told each other about their fates. They both had much to share. They also had something to complain to their family. Maggie had never had any sisters, and Emily and Trixie didn't see each other as often as they would have liked in their spare time. Emily had finished her home nursing course, after all, and was now considered prepared for the unexpected that could happen on the road. On one of the flights, a company of businessmen became passengers. Emily didn't like it right away. Always with this public, some kind of trouble happens. They complain about something without any reason, or demand something. I guess they compare the train to their own office. But what can you do? You can't just drop them off. This time it was not without difficulties. At first, the businessmen behaved quite calmly, young and decent people. It is obvious that they are well-to-do and not in need of anything. They refused tea and closed themselves in their compartment, solving some questions. Suddenly, one of them burst into the compartment of the conductor. "Girl, I need a doctor urgently. Do you have any doctors on the train?" "There's a man in there feeling bad, suffocating. I don't know. We'll have to make an announcement." "What's wrong?" Emily asked. "Who cares what? You're not a doctor, are you?" The passenger became indignant. "I'm not a doctor, but I can administer first aid." She firmly pushed the petitioner away. Taking the first aid kit, she hurried to his compartment. "They'll call a doctor right away. Don't worry." "I don't know what's wrong with him." He drank some medicine, suddenly entering the compartment. Emily noticed the serious swelling on the young man's face and quickly realized everything. Anaphylactic shock. An allergy, apparently. "What's the drug?" "Where did he get it?" she asked, preparing a syringe.
Wherever he needed it, where he got it, the doctor found it. "What are you going to inject him with? I'm telling you to call an ambulance," scandalized the victim's companion.
"Please calm down. My partner has already called everyone, and I know what to do." Emily quickly administered an injection and gave the injured man the necessary first aid. The passenger was rescued and regained consciousness rather quickly. "Thank you, Savior," he said as he shook Emily's hand. "That's a little something like that. I'll pay you for it, and I'll pay you back too. Chuck, you're the one who slipped me this." He turned to his partner.
"What did I slip you?" "You took something yourself. I don't know if you can or can't. You like to blame others."
Yeah, the story was almost criminal. His partner, a competitor of the businessman, gave him headache medicine that he couldn't take. What did he know? Well, he also knew that an allergic reaction can kill you, and that might well have happened if Emily hadn't been there. "Thank you. You just saved me." The injured man shook her hand. "So are you a doctor too, or what?" No, I'm a conductor, but I graduated from nursing school, so I know roughly what happened to you." "It's no big deal, really. It's really good that I happened to be around," Emily said, putting the medication away. "You just see your doctor. He'll help you out. I don't think you'll need anything else, though." "I know, it's happened to me before. Allergies are a scary thing, really, and the one who triggered it, Chuck, you might say is a companion, but really a competitor. Apparently that's how he wants to eliminate me." "Can you give a reference as to what caused all this to happen?" the man asked.
"How can I give it if I'm not a doctor?" Emily replied. "I can testify, of course. Are you going to sue him, though?"
"I don't know yet. I actually want to break up with him. I mean, kick him out before some more serious trouble happens, although it wouldn't hurt to punish him for that sort of thing. It's a hell of a way to go. I don't want to get involved, of course, but it wouldn't hurt to tell everyone what Chuck's done. Let everyone be careful with him." "Well, that's right. I won't argue. People like that are generally best kept away." They talked some more. Emily noticed that the passenger's condition had stabilized and went about her business. When the businessman was getting ready to get off at his station, he approached her again, bade her farewell, offered her money for her help, but she, of course, declined, and even felt a little hurt by such an offer. Although she liked this young man, she did not think at all that their acquaintance would continue. For the next few days, she was thoughtful and distracted, and Maggie, who worked with her, was even surprised. "I don't recognize you. Always so cheerful, so active. And now you're walking around like you're in the water," her sister told her. "I don't know what's wrong with me. You know, after Greg and I broke up, I didn't really pay much attention to anyone. Well, it's not like I'm still in love with the ex. No, it's not. I even hate him after the shit Jennifer did to us. But I don't really like or trust other men either. I don't even like these road trips. They don't do any good. I've seen all sorts of things. You know, there are such conductors, and among ours, too, who on every voyage choose some man and imagine it's love. I'll never do that," Emily tried to explain her mood. "And I'm not going to either. And anyway, you have to separate work and personal life. Otherwise, take our father, for example. How do we know if he only lied to our moms or if he lied somewhere else along the way? There are families with kids. I just don't understand what you're saying." "Did you fall in love with someone?" Maggie wondered. "Oh, I don't know myself. There's this guy, but I can't figure out what it is. I think about him all the time. And he got off at his station, and that's all. I don't even know where he lives, if I can meet him. Well, at least a glimpse of him. And so sad about it," Emily admitted. "But I'm definitely in love." "But that's a good thing, Vincent. I'd love to be in love too, but I just can't seem to do it," Maggie sighed. Strangely enough, as she finished her shift and stepped off the train, Emily saw Hercule with a bouquet of flowers. He noticed her too and walked over. "Found out when you were finishing work and thought I'd meet you and thank you." "You don't have to. Thank you for the beautiful flowers, though. It's been a while since anyone's given them," Emily brightened. "You're not married." "No, divorced, and I have a child." "He's 6, admitted Emily, who had no intention of hiding anything. "You must be very tired. Hurry home to your son. I won't keep you, but I'll walk you home, and let's meet tomorrow. I'll invite you to a restaurant or anywhere else you want to go." It was obvious that he was a little shy, but he spoke sincerely. "You know, I'd really like to go out. I don't really care where, as long as it's just for a walk. Maybe just down the street," Emily suddenly blurted out, determined not to be modest this time. It was not, of course, a confession of affection, but still, maybe he would realize that he had not left her indifferent. Hercule seemed to guess it, for he was glad of it. He accompanied Emily home, and they made arrangements for tomorrow's meeting, and she was welcomed home by a happy, bored Kieran, who had his own plans for tomorrow with his mom. "I so wish you weren't going anywhere already," said the son. "Why don't you get some other job so you can leave in the morning and always come in the evening, like all moms do? I'm bored without you." "I'll try," buddy. Emily kissed him, who also wanted to find another place. It was so hard for her to leave her son alone for long periods of time. "I'll definitely think about it. Will you let me go tomorrow night? I have a little business there. I'd really like to get away for a while." Again, the son was upset. "But it's not enough that you're gone all day long. You're going to leave in the evening. I could hardly wait. I have so much to tell you. Why don't you take me with you?" Emily was upset too. She realized she was depriving her child of her own company, and that was a bad thing. But what could she do? She wanted to see Hercule. In the evening, she called Maggie and told her about the date for tomorrow. Her sister was delighted. "There, I told you you'd be together. Vincent, it's fate. It's their destiny. But I guess I'll have to call him now and turn him down. Kieran misses me so much. He wants to be with me. I can't abandon the baby for my love life. It's not right. Don't you agree?" "Did you tell your beau that you have a son? Then you could have arranged it so that you all go to some playground together or something else. The child would feel good, and so would you." "Oh, I don't know if Hercule would agree. He wants to meet me and I want to meet the baby. That's not right either," Emily hesitated. "You know, if his intentions are serious, it won't scare him. And if he just wants to have fun, why would you want to do that? Well, or invite him over to your house. Then spend time all together, and he'll see how you live, what kind of hostess you are. You know, you're probably right. I'm going to call him and tell him I can't leave my son," Emily said firmly. And so she did. She called, apologized, and explained that she and her son missed each other too much and couldn't bear to part ways. Maybe some other time, she suggested gently, afraid that Hercule would hang up now. but he took it with complete understanding. Yes, of course. Somehow I hadn't thought of that. Would you like to keep me company? The three of us could go out. I think there's a nice kids' cafe in the neighborhood. Emily was ready to dance with joy. She had never expected to find such an understanding and kind man who was willing to spend time not only with her, but also with her child. Of course we'd love to, she said. That day of the first date went just fine. All three were happy and had no doubt that their meeting would not be their last. Hercule seemed to be quite serious. He himself had brought up the idea that it would be a good idea for Emily to learn another profession so that she wouldn't have to go far and long. I don't know yet. I'm really not good at anything else after all, and I'm not educated. I've only got courses in conductors and nursing, and with courses they won't take me very far, she explained. Why not? You've got to find out first. Maybe it's all quite real. To work as a nurse, let's say, just in the treatment room, you do bandages, right? You give shots too. He saved me, Hercule was saying. But maybe, if only, so she answered doubtfully. All relatives and acquaintances supported her. Maggie, who had grown tired of the romance of long-distance travel rather quickly, was also not against it. Honestly, it's not for us. This job is not for moms. We'll be constantly on the road. We won't notice how our sons will grow up. And it's good if they grow up right, in the sense of good people. You know what happens to kids who are left unsupervised. Erich communicates with street children and says that it is not the best company, and many become such not because the parents died or for some other serious reasons. A lot of them have a mom and a dad. They just don't have time for kids, so they just hang around doing nothing. I'm thinking of going to school too, but of course not to study medicine, but something else. Maybe an accountant, Maggie reasoned. Emily and Hercule's relationship was developing. The young man had already become his own not only in her house, but also got acquainted with all her family. He was already perceived by everyone as a fiancé. Relations with Jennifer, he had a great relationship, and the matter was steadily moving towards the wedding. On the engagement of the whole family was invited to the restaurant. In front of everyone, Hercule handed her favorite bouquet, put on her finger ring, and asked to become his wife. The consent was met with applause. How I envy you, said Maggie. I want a love story like that, too. Shall I travel some more? I'll meet my fate, too. Actually, Maggie had already finished her accounting courses, and she'd been accepted for an internship with the company. She decided that a sedentary lifestyle was preferable for her with a child and a blind grandfather, so the words about continuing to travel were more of a joke, and her sister assured her that fate would find her at home. And so it happened that very evening in the restaurant. One of Hercule's friends noticed Maggie and asked her to dance, then on a date, and soon between them also began a relationship that led to the wedding, which occurred 6 months after the marriage of Hercule and Emily. Emily was not only a guest, but also a witness. Everyone said pregnant witness at the wedding. A guarantee of a strong family, and Emily had been expecting her second child for 6 months. Claire looked apprehensively at the class she was about to be the new girl in. Her father had gotten a high appointment in this town. Like they weren't doing well in New York. No, he needed a springboard to advance his career. His old position had become too tight for his ambitions. Now they'd have to spend about 5 years here. Her arrival did not arouse much interest in her classmates. Well, a new girl came, that's fine. Everyone was talking animatedly about the summer vacation that had just ended. There were some remarks to her. Mom sent me to the country. I was stuck in the vegetable garden, picking all the crops. It's good that there is a lake in the village. We went fishing every other day. Then we fried fish on the shore on the coals from the fire. Girls, look what a sundress I got at the sea. Girls. All the boys looked at me. I was so pretty. Near the window, 2 slightly funny bespectacled men, a girl and a guy, were talking to each other about the list of additional literature for extracurricular reading. No, I never got into this Shakespeare and his Hamlet, said the guy. But remarks 3 comrades is a thing. I reread it twice. and I took up the Master and Margarita ahead of time," replied the girl. I couldn't tear myself away. I swallowed it. "You haven't read it yet? I'll bring you the novel tomorrow. It's definitely your type." Claire remembered similar conversations after long vacations at school in Moscow. Heaven and earth, a completely different world and life. How could she share with her new classmates that she'd sunbathed on France's Côte d'Azur this summer and then traveled with her parents to the Greek island of Crete, exploring the traces of civilization? They would have gawked at her as if she were an alien. But there was no choice. One had to get used to it and settle in. And she wasn't proud or imagining she'd been born with a silver spoon in her mouth. Hannah had managed to catch her parents' life and her own in a communal apartment with 4 families in the neighborhood. Then her father dramatically moved up the career ladder. A designer by trade, he invented something for the airplane industry. Hannah was never interested in the details. Nevertheless, he had first been invited to work in New York City from the suburbs, and now he was sent to head a new industrial plant in the Northwest, built specifically for his brilliant, undoubtedly talented invention. Hannah's mother didn't come from a wealthy family. She started out as a manicure and pedicure master in New York City. Her husband, with fabulous fees for new technical ideas, helped her buy out a rundown hair salon. In a year, a woman with golden hands turned the institution into an elite salon. She followed her husband like a Decembrist wife. Is it possible that women don't go for manicures and pedicures? Will she be in demand in the new place? In a medium-sized town, the family of a designer, and now the head of a large company. 3-room apartments in a new building were allocated to them immediately. You can't miss such a specialist. Who could replace him? He is constantly generating new inventions. In an apartment complex on the outskirts of the city, they were looking for a beauty parlor manager. Hannah's mother came in handy from the get-go. What was Hannah supposed to do? She couldn't live a sheltered life. Now it was a 3-stop bus ride to school. It's a short distance. In good weather, you could easily walk it. That's how she ended up in 10th grade. It was still 2 years until she received her matriculation certificate. When the bell finally rang on September 1st, the class teacher introduced the newcomer to the class and looked around. "We don't have a lot of desks in the classroom. You, Hannah, have only 1 seat next to our local star Robin Kovalev. Here he is, late as usual." The table was the last one in the middle row. Claire looked back at her newly arrived classmate. Tall, statuesque, handsome, with mischievous eyes. He was wearing jeans and a blue polo shirt that fit him well. You could sit at the same desk with a guy like that, since there were no other options. He and Robin were silent for the first 2 classes, and then they talked about everything. The guy wasn't as well-read as she was, didn't watch some movies and didn't read many books, except for internet videos. He had never traveled further than Miami and had only seen this sea, had not been to New York, Washington. About Europe and other continents, where Claire had already been, she immediately kept silent. But he could definitely give her a head start on domestic matters. He fixed Claire's broken backpack in seconds. And when the homeroom teacher was handing out tickets to the touring production of Michael Rochan's Valentine, and Valentine Robin had gotten them the 2 best seats. It was a gift from their parents to all the students in honor of the start of the school year. Getting into their drama theater during the arrival of the capital's artists wasn't easy. So Claire and Robin became fast friends that no one noticed how the formidable Robin Kovalev fell in love with the new girl at first sight. It was written all over his face. Claire accepted his attentions condescendingly. After the play, she let him walk her out, but she wouldn't let him kiss her in the entryway yet. She was a girl with old-fashioned views and principles, wouldn't kiss a guy after 3 days of dating. On the way, she told Robin about famous actors and the meaning of Rochan's play, but he never understood the meaning of the title. He remained silent. He didn't want to seem like a silly man, far from the theater arts. What bothered him was a meeting he'd set up with some guys from the neighborhood about some, as they put it, proposal of interest to him. He and Claire were from different families. He'd never had any extra money at home. His parents, tobacco factory workers, breathed tobacco dust all day and sold the surplus off the line to the neighbors. Robin had an older brother who was already married. They all lived in an old private house with green shutters on the windows and a wooden porch that creaked under the footsteps of adults. Robin's parents already had 2 grandchildren running around in the yard, and everyone had to be clothed and fed. So the guy had long ago adapted to part-time work, selling surplus cigarettes to passers-by or unloading trucks near the grocery store on weekends. So he bought his jeans, in which he flaunted in front of his classmates, and a fashionable polo shirt himself. And now he was feverishly thinking about what kind of lucrative offer the older guys from the neighboring neighborhood had decided to make him. They looked a little criminal. Yeah, well, he's not the shy type either. He'll figure it out. If he can make some money, he'll take Claire to the movies, back row. Maybe she'll finally let him kiss her. That dream made him shiver with desire. Claire didn't feel the same way. The timid advances of the first guy in the new place had only boosted her self-esteem. But she was a little bored with him. Where was she and where was he? It's ridiculous to think of them as a couple. She even told her mom that she had a devoted beau. But she'd said, "You should be thinking about your studies, Claire. With your looks and my ability to emphasize them, you will always be worthy of many." Claire smiled contentedly. The burning interest from a cute boy is still nice to me. Mommy, we'll see there. What's the best thing to use him for? At this moment, the cute guy was just approaching the meeting place with potential employers in the vacant lot. There was no fear. At stake was a date with Claire, for whom he was ready to get the moon out of the sky. There was one female among the silent crowd that soon surrounded him. Even though he loved his high school sweetheart, Robin was a little taken aback. At first, she was beautiful. Her loose hair swept down her formidable back in a wave of red, and her green eyes looked boldly at the dashing crowd of young men, not at all embarrassed by their formidable appearance. She was built like Aphrodite, brave like the warlike Athena, and made for love like the beautiful Venus. Robin wasn't very familiar with Greek and Roman mythology, but that was the image the young woman conjured up. Pushing this beautiful vision aside, a large guy with angry wolf eyes, the leader of the group with a huge ego, stepped forward. "So that's what you are, the local Caliban. I've heard rumors of your technical talents. Rumor has it you can pick any lock with 2 pops. Are people lying or stories?" Robin did indeed help everyone in the neighborhood all the time. People would lose their keys to their apartment or garage, or something would get stuck or break, leaving the owners unable to use the mechanism. He'd come over, click a couple times, and everything would work like clockwork. Or at least it would open, allowing eager neighbors to enter. "It's not much of a science," the big guy said. "My father worked all his life as an adjuster on the line, and taught his sons a few things along the way. People do not lie. I'm friends with locks of almost any complexity. What do you want?" "Don't push your luck," Kid, the leader of the local gang, cut him off. "We have a proposition for you, a favorable one for all of us. I won't keep you waiting in riddles. All genius is simple. You'll open the cars for us, the ones we tell you to open. We'll pay you handsomely for your talents. Think about it for 3 days. We await your decision." Robin looked at the leader in silence, at the members of the group, at the smiling girl. He didn't think much about it, so he answered right away. "Why wait 3 days? I'm in." Everyone around him breathed a sigh of relief. The leader of the street group extended his hand, and then also patted him approvingly on the shoulder, saying, "And the man, as Vysotsky has it, a proven comrade of ours." Robin opened the first car the next day. The rest was not his concern. He'd gotten his share of the money that very evening. Now he had the means to invite Claire not only to a movie, but also to a cafe beforehand. The carousel spun, the money flowed. The guy didn't think about the consequences. Fate was keeping him safe for now. Robin and Claire went not only to a fancy restaurant, to a concert of a rock band in a closed club, to an exhibition of impressionist painters, where they couldn't understand a single picture, but also went to a country entertainment center with kebabs and a heated pool in the fresh air. Things weren't moving. Claire wouldn't let the guy anywhere near her body or her soul. He didn't know how to make her reciprocate his feelings, and agonized with this uncertainty all the time. He wanted to ask her directly, "Are we together, or are you just playing with me?" One day, once again, he tried to press her against the wall in the entryway. They pressed their lips together, but she pushed him away. "Robin." She called him often when they were alone together. "Who the hell do you think you are? That's not why we're friends anymore. We're from parallel worlds in culture, development, intelligence. Do you remember the play Valentine and Valentina? It was about couples like you and me. Be thankful I'm still spending time with you, but don't ever let go." That hat doesn't fit Robin at all. He left, slamming the front door loudly, and he was gone for a long time. At school, he moved abruptly to another desk, putting the right bespectacled boy next to Claire. After school, he didn't see her off, didn't ask her to go for a walk, didn't put chocolates or apples in her backpack. New Year's Eve passed. Winter vacation flashed by. To Claire and her mother did not get bored. Her father took them to the hot Miami to bask in the sun. In January, the girl returned rested and tanned, and there ran the days of the longest quarter. There was no time to think. She didn't even look at Robin. They were friends. They stopped being friends. It happens when you're young. And Robin had gone off to experiment with car theft. He didn't get disturbed very often, once a week or even twice a week. It usually took him no more than a couple of minutes to work with the lock, and often with the alarm system. The car had no time to make a pitiful squeak, and already changed the owner. And everything would have gone on smoothly, but once again, at the resale gang of hijackers punctured. The owner of the car was a certain influential official. The criminals were caught quickly, and did not treat them with ceremony for a long time. The longest sentence was given to Mickey, but the others were to spend more than a year in prison. None of the boys mentioned Robin. They kept their mouths shut. He got off scot-free. Good thing the kid was in the habit of saving up his stash. He changed his clothes, kissed his family, gave presents, and laid low. Senior year's coming up. He wasn't getting good grades, and after school he had to go somewhere to study. He could use a little capital. Robin tried to tear Claire out of his soul, but she stayed there like a splinter. Sometimes he said to himself, "Well, I'm not Valentine. She's not my Valentine. It's not fate." He met the girlfriend of the leader of their street team at the store by chance. She had faded. She was buying cigarettes for herself in front of his eyes, not the most expensive ones. What did she have enough money for? Slid a casual glance at him. Hannah didn't recognize him at first, but then she perked up. "Are you out, Robin? Skipping school? Why don't you buy the lady some champagne? I'm starting to forget what champagne tastes like." "Easy," Robin said in her tone of voice. "Pick whichever one's looking at you in the window." Hannah, a sultry redhead, chose a local red sparkling wine that tasted good. She bought a box of assorted cakes, a slice of cheese, and a bag of mixed nuts. Taking Robin under her arm, she whispered languidly in his ear, "Come to my place. I'm home alone now. Ricardo is dying of boredom and boredom. Already what has come to what soap operas on TV began to watch. When in his stall behind the counter is not standing behind the counter. The owner is such a jerk, he hasn't paid my salary for 2 weeks. He says it's a small turnover. What am I supposed to eat, pray tell?" Robin's legs were starting to feel wobbly. This mature, experienced girl had him worried sick. At 16, who wouldn't want to have a peek at a woman like that? He quickly mumbled, "I'll be right back," and went back to the store. He'd have to get the redhead something special. But what would he find in a regular supermarket? The idea came quickly he'd spoil her a little. He stuffed a bag full of tropical fruit, a carton of the most expensive cigarettes, a bottle of Armenian cognac. Robin rushed outside, hoping that his vision in female form hadn't evaporated. Hannah waited for him patiently. She must have been desperate for money. She looked greedily into his bag, approved. "You're a good-looking boy, and looks quite nice, and you are a friend of the head. Come here. We're announcing an after-hours party tonight. Call your parents and tell them you're staying at a friend's house. I like to take long walks, take my time." Robin's feet hit the ground when she said that. He had texted something on the phone to his parents that he would be unloading cars all night and then spending the night at a buddy's place near the mall. His parents haven't controlled his personal life in a long time. He goes to school, doesn't skip class. That's good enough. Moreover, it's a day off Sunday. No need to go to school tomorrow. Let the boy have fun as he wants. It's a young thing, fun, no need for money, and they don't have a penny to spare. Hannah didn't live in the palace Robin had imagined. It was an old, shabby, two-story house. It had clearly been built a long time ago. The entryway smelled, as usual, of sauerkraut and a little bit of cats and mice. A couple of stray cats were just warming themselves near the radiator on a thin cardboard. "I'm so sick of you two," Hannah kicked one of them angrily. In another time, Robin would have stood up for these stray animals, but now he remained fearfully silent. This woman was leading him into an unknown world. He was afraid of spoiling the romance of the imminent moment. As promised, Hannah's celebration of their meeting was very leisurely. She asked him to open both champagne and cognac, but she mixed them together in tall, thin glasses, squeezed juice from large oranges, cut up fruit, enjoyed nuts and elite cheese. Then she suddenly announced to Robin that she was hot and had to change right in her room, and she didn't think to leave for the bathroom. The experienced Amazon and the young tough guy made a great duo. The rest of the winter flashed by. In an instant, Robin was running to his goddess like a faithful knight, henchman, servant. The stash had long since been retrieved from its hiding place. Hannah's appetite had grown by leaps and bounds. His supplies were no longer enough for new boots or pearl earrings. It was a strange affair, no matter how you looked at it. Robin was ready to become her slave. Every time he was with her, it was as if he were dying and being reborn from the thrill of sensuality. He was jealous of Mickey, who was now in jail, painting pictures of her with him. Thoughts of Claire vanished from Robin's mind almost without a trace. So she sometimes briefly resurfaced in Robin's mind, along with the urge to say, "You should see what a gorgeous woman I have in my arms right now. You're no match for me, and you kept calling me Mr. Poor man, smoking all the time. We're not a couple." Claire went to school pensive. At home, her father's company wasn't good. Somewhere up there was a change of leadership. Directives came one after the other, and they were all kind of silly, like commands: "Stop there, come here." These constant swings were undermining the company from the inside. Claire's father kept saying he was going to quit the whole thing. He wasn't a boy to be bullied like that. The women in the family had thought he was joking at first, relieving the tension by yelling at them both. But his character was deteriorating before their eyes. In the clinic, where the woman, frightened by such actions, went, the psychotherapist nodded understandingly. This is a midlife crisis, which fell for a man at a difficult time in his professional life. If you want to save him from an early stroke or heart attack, it is better to let him uncompromisingly quit than to suffer another humiliation from his bosses. That same evening, a major family conversation took place in their home. Claire's mother even took time off work for the occasion and prepared a special dinner. She didn't keep the problem from her daughter. She also told her husband directly what awaited him if he stayed at his old job. We all made a decision together with drawings and ideas. Out. A bright design head like that can be useful anywhere. Claire's father at first refused, all translated arrows on the fact that they will lose a lot in material terms. But his wife was a stubborn woman, and she loved her husband dearly. We need you alive and well, and we'll earn the rest with a stranger. We'll do it. Haven't we afforded ourselves enough? Eating good food, dressing nicely, spending money freely on trips. You and me, honey, we've seen a lot of things. Lucinda's got a lot more ahead of her. It's time to make a stop. Tomorrow you'll be handing in your letter of resignation. The woman wasn't wrong in the slightest. Such an experienced designer was immediately poached by a nice technical research institute. Claire's father no longer believed the promising promises of his former colleagues that all roads were open to him. Fish rots from the head. The industry's leadership was clearly going the wrong way. The wrong way it was only a matter of time. The girl's mother continued to work in her beauty parlor. Claire was safely into the 11th grade. Life did not stop, only the demands and opportunities became different. The key was that the family came out of the alleged circumstances without moral and physical losses. This is a good time to remember the famous wisdom, God, thank you for taking money. 11th grade. No bright moves in the lives of two once friendly classmates did not produce. Claire has slowed down in her ideas about who is suitable for her as a lover and who is not. She forgot her philosophy about relationships and characters from the celebrated play. All her energies threw to realize her cherished dream to become a stewardess on international airlines. At home with her parents, she kept joking, "My good people. I used to fly around the world as a passenger. Now I want to be useful to people when they travel. It's such a wonderful profession with romantic overtones. I'm with a bunch of brave pilots. I am in a nice, beautiful uniform, and behind the porthole, snow-white clouds surrounding my happiness." The older generation didn't argue. If a girl wants to try it, let her try it. Her knowledge would be enough to enter the Institute of Civil Aviation. Robin did what he could to fulfill Hannah's needs. It would have been foolish to give up her schooling, and there wasn't enough money from the loader's salary to cover her whims. One spring day, when he was about to take his final exams at school, he fell asleep during a counseling session. And it was none other than Claire who helped him out. "Robin, wake up. Wake up." She poked him in the side, shielding him from the evil history teacher with her body. "If our evil teacher sees you like this, you're in trouble. She'll give you a failing grade on your final exam. She'll do it." The boy opened his eyes tiredly and stared at Claire understandingly. Yesterday his beloved had given him a condition: either he would take her to the sea in the summer, or she would find a new sponsor. For the first time he suddenly realized that he was deadly, unbearably, rigidly tired. Even his young body could no longer withstand these fierce physical exertions when he took the heaviest loads with double payment and tore himself from the last strength. They walked out of the school together. Robin, clueless, tried to follow Claire to her house. She asked him to come over, and he didn't have the strength to refuse. While she put the kettle on and searched the fridge for something tasty, the boy fell asleep in the living room on the soft corner sofa. She didn't bother to wake him up. He had once tried so hard to please her, wooing her, pampering her, giving her a sea of his attention. Well, he can't sleep properly in my house. Especially my parents went to a sanatorium for a month and should have returned only by the beginning of my exams, she thought. Outside the window she smelled lilacs, cherry blossoms, and spring May. Now she would make herself some coffee and sandwiches and go cram for English. Tomorrow was class, and she hadn't even started her notes yet. Robin slept through the day and the night. When he woke up, he didn't even realize where he was. In the kitchen, someone was humming a popular song. It smelled of coffee and fresh baked goods. He instinctively moved toward the tantalizing sounds and smells. In the cozy kitchen with light curtains on the windows was Claire. She was baking pancakes and humming something to herself. "Claire, did I sleep here for almost 24 hours?" he asked. "You're welcome," she said. "I'm alone now. My parents are at sea, while still affordable rates in the sanatorium, and I was left on the farm. Is breakfast ready? Go wash up now." And so Robin became her housemate. The loud bells were ringing in her ears. It was as if this hard time with Hannah and the warm tea and heart-wrenching connection hadn't happened. The sun was shining through the window, bright and almost summer warm. Not a cloud in the sky. The sense of spring blossoms floated through the room. A stack of ruddy pancakes on a plate beckoned with appetite, and next to it a saucer with sour cream, coffee in clay mugs, a jar of condensed milk, a plastic package with jam. He had forgotten that mornings could be so serene and bright. He touched his lips lightly to Claire's before leaving gratefully. She smelled deliciously of pancakes and new blackcurrant jam. For the first time, she didn't pull away. As he said goodbye, he suddenly thought, she's all grown up now, or I'm no longer disgusting, unnecessary, inappropriate for her. He walked to Hannah's house with a heavy heart, urged on by her. The required amount of money he had never been able to earn. Opening the door with the key the woman had given him, he listened for a long time. There was silence in the apartment. Only in the room there were sounds like whispers. He opened the door. On the table was a box with the most expensive phone that his girlfriend had dreamed of. There were two people lying on the bed, talking quietly. "Get out." Hannah threw him in his direction without even batting an eyebrow. "I waited for you yesterday, my boy, and it's late today." The train left, taking the other passengers with it. Finita la comedy. Put the key to my apartment on the nightstand in the hallway and forget about it. I'm sick of you. Robin left her house without a sound. He felt as if he'd been doused with dirty water by an unscrupulous landlady somewhere in the back of his life. He listened to himself in surprise. He no longer wanted that red-haired, so artificial love, for which he would easily have laid the whole world at her feet if he had had the chance. Nor did he think of Claire. Last night in her apartment now seemed to him a dream, a joke, a mirage, an illusion. He had thrown all his energies into getting away from this shameful city. He would join the army, enlist in the north, become a long-distance sailor, a polar explorer, a submariner, only not to see more of these streets, which brought him nothing but hardship and betrayal. Claire and Robin passed their high school graduation exams without a hitch. She got the prestigious A's and he got the C's. That didn't stop them from getting their diplomas after the day they'd unexpectedly spent together at Claire's apartment. The young people talked sweetly sometimes, but it never got any further than that. It was as if a glass partition stood between them. They could see each other, but they couldn't get closer, despite the fragility of the imaginary barrier. A month later, Claire started packing her bags for the regional center. She was determined to follow her dream of conquering the skies in a beautiful stewardess uniform. Robin left all the extra nighttime unloading jobs behind. Since he was a little older than his classmates, the military draft was just around the corner for him. The girl passed the entrance exams to the institute that trains specialists in civil aviation without difficulty. She put her things in the dormitory, decided to return to her parents for a week, while she has not yet so easily experienced the separation from them. At the train station, unexpectedly met a school friend who saw his family off on vacation. "Claire, what are you doing in town?" he asked. "I heard that you successfully entered the university. You're going to be the pride of our class, a sky wizard on airliners." "You know, Robin, I didn't expect to be such a daddy's girl," she said. "It's only been a couple weeks without them. I missed them. I came here to spend a little more time with them. What are you going to do tonight?" Suddenly, her ex-boyfriend asked her, "You haven't thought about it yet. Is there a proposal?" "Why not?" Robin said with an air of importance. "Let's go to the movie theater and spend some time. I don't have the money, but I can afford to buy a ticket for my friend." They had both grown up. Robin didn't want to puff up his cheeks to show that he was such an important guy. As they say, love us poor, love us rich, everyone will love us. Claire herself had changed. She no longer cared about her comrade's status as before. She was more attracted by the fact that she was always very easy with him. They agreed to meet in the park by the movie theater that evening. Robin didn't take the last row of tickets so that he could be with his girlfriend in the dark seclusion, who had Hannah helped him get close to. He had no desire to kiss Claire, much less to take her to bed. There was a huge distance between the two women, and he sensed it keenly. After a rather interesting movie, they walked home. Robin told his former classmate about his plans to serve in the army and then to get an education. Claire told him the story of her vacation in Crete with her parents. There they once rented a car to see the capital of the island. They were driving along a quiet highway when suddenly, almost next to them, a passenger airliner with burning portholes soared into the sky. Apparently, the local airport was a stone's throw from the road. This stunning sight was the impetus for her future dream. She had already imagined herself walking with a tray of drinks between the rows of seats. Now she was taking real steps towards realizing it. In Claire's entryway, there was an unexpected event for Robin. The girl stood on tiptoe and kissed him herself. "Thank you," she said. "I've been working on my textbooks all last year. Already forgot what it is to go to the movies, carefree to spend the evening in pleasant company." He didn't pounce on her like a kite, but returned her tender kiss, put his arm around her shoulders, pressed her against him for a split second, and then released her. "Claire, marry me," Robin said. "You're always so sweet. It's not for nothing that I used to swoon when you touched my hand at school. You've stirred up all those feelings in me today. I've changed my views on many things in life. I promise to wait for your answer as long as it takes." Claire was stunned. "Robin, you were crazy. And you're still crazy," she began to make her arguments confusingly. "What marriage? I don't turn 18 until October. Ahead of years of study, formation, career in the chosen profession. I have long ago thrown out of my head all silly ideas about princes and princesses. Now I want something else to stand firmly on my feet in life. And there and then think about a husband." He was not offended by her refusal. The main thing here was to indicate his intentions. Perhaps the girl was right. He hurried, voiced them on a wave of emotional impulse. The truth was that he spoke sincerely. He really felt surprisingly good and at ease with her. "I heard you," he said calmly to the girl. "I will not give up my dream of marrying you. I will pursue you again and again. And someday you will realize that I am like in that popular song, The One Who Is Needed." They had ice cream at the cafe. "Tomorrow we'll go for a chocolate-covered ice cream with sprinkles and nuts. We'll have it tomorrow. I've got a stash," Robin suggested. During the week, they had time to eat ice cream and go to the movies a couple of times. They said goodbye in the entryway, as was the custom. A couple of tender kisses as a sign of warmth in their relationship, and then they went home. Robin didn't recognize himself. He was afraid of offending Claire with his overly insistent, frank touches and pushing. He wanted to get to know this girl gradually, in small sips, and someday to know her completely. 7 days later, Claire left to study, and he stayed behind to wait for the summons to the military enlistment office. He didn't get high marks on his school certificate. He hoped with all his might that he would make up for it by serving in the army, where institutions were more loyal. He will eventually get his student card. Claire didn't make it to Robin's send-off. They were now in a different format of communication. All day long, when they were free, they texted each other. Before they left, the guy asked, "Claire, will you be waiting for me after your enlistment? After all, now you only have to serve a year. Can you do that without me?" Claire was at a crossroads. She couldn't understand what it was between her and Robin. Love? Romance? Friendship? A friendly relationship with a hint of romance? It was nothing like that, almost childish kissing in the driveway. It wasn't serious. And Robin's proposal of marriage seemed to her to be a momentary mood, not a global approach to the future. Right now, studying was taking up all her time. Like other, more frivolous future stewardesses, she didn't disappear on dates and parties. Along with English, she took up Asian studies and began to learn Chinese and Korean. Stewardesses with knowledge of Asian realities were valued for their weight in gold. She passed to the second year with all excellent grades in her credits. By summer, Robin had fallen out of favor in the army. There were only a couple of months left before demobilization, and he was ready to snap, to go OL for a long time, to ruin his record with a daring act. Claire had the character trait of making decisions in the blink of an eye. She'd had enough of her parents over summer vacation. August this year had been increasingly cool and rainy. No joy. And Robin is serving in the Caucasus near the majestic mountains, around the national color of the local people, ancient fortresses, the sea, authentic dishes in cafes and canteens. She should fly to him to boost his service spirit a bit. Or are they not real friends and close people? Dad and Mom approved her idea, provided money for the trip, booked her remotely a room in a hotel near Robin's military unit. They didn't get the kids' hopes up. Let the surprise be a complete surprise. 2 days later, at the checkpoint, Claire asked for the private she needed from the barracks. Robin didn't even realize at first that she wasn't a mirage. In honor of the arrival of his favorite girl, the command of the military unit was generous. The colonel had signed Robin's leave of absence for 3 whole days. Robin and Claire hugged each other as they walked from the military garrison to the neighboring town and couldn't talk enough. They both felt that they missed each other, that everything was back to normal, that they were so good together, that all their former disagreements were just a mistake. They didn't go to the hotel. They went for a walk around the city first. Claire was so proud of the fact that next to her was a more masculine and handsome man, that she looked at their reflection in all the store windows. In the cafe, they ordered a real Caucasian lamb kebab, warm flatbread with cheese, lots of seasonal herbs and vegetables. Should we drink it all with grape wine? And again, we chatted nonstop. We couldn't believe that we seemed to have wasted so much time we could have spent together. It was late afternoon when they got to the hotel. Robin wanted to book the room next door to Claire's, but she gave him such an expressive look that he hesitated, took her hand, and pushed open the door to a cozy studio with a kitchenette and a huge bed. They fiddled around for a long while longer, watching intermittently some comedy on TV, drinking tea with cookies and honey. The sweets were compliments of the hospitable establishment. Before going to bed, Robin looked questioningly at Claire once more without further ado. She nodded affirmatively and silently too. They spent the remaining 2 days of their stay in love with each other, exploring the local landmark, an ancient fortress with many elegant tower labyrinths, and sampling a lot of national dishes. A lot of time was spent in bed, not thinking about hot embraces. By the evening of the 3rd day, Robin's leave of absence was over. He went to the military unit, and Claire went to the airport. In her hand luggage, she found a first aid kit, which didn't want to tighten because of a packet of pills that kept falling out of it. Claire shoved it back in frustratedly and was stunned. It was the birth control pills her mother had given her before the trip. Impressed by the new places and meeting her boyfriend, Claire had never even remembered them. For a couple of weeks after the trip, the young woman still hoped that the dates with Robin did not end for 2 healthy people who forgot about the existence of contraception. The logical outcome, alas, was that she began to vomit so persistently. The reaction to the smells of food was so strong that here even to the antenatal clinic could not be rushed. Even the gestational age she'd calculated with an accuracy of plus or minus 2 days. And she told Robin the news at once, so he didn't have to beat around the bush. He replied that he was happy, that he would be home soon, and that they would get married right away. They were married when she was 4 months pregnant. It was decided that she would pass the winter session and immediately go on sabbatical. The birth of a baby was more important than any dream of a brilliant career as a flight attendant. And while they rented a small apartment in the regional center, Robin got a temporary job in a car service. The parents also helped the young family waiting for a child. Their son Cameron was born to them as a healthy little boy. While the inexperienced mom everything fell out of hand, the newlyweds moved in with her parents. Where is it seen that the mother did not help her daughter in such a difficult moment? For a whole year, it was all about Cameron. Robin would come home from his job, which he'd quickly found here, and take turns walking with his grandfather in the stroller. Anyone who's raised a baby with love knows how much care and trouble it is. Everyone tried to please Cameron in the sense that he would remain as healthy and strong as ever. Except that Robin was staying late at work more and more often, under plausible excuses. While everyone was out with his son and grandson, he was earning a penny. How did he explain that to Claire? Trouble comes to a house in different ways. When it sneaks in, when it sneaks out, when it sneaks in proudly. Claire's been making friends with a mom in the yard lately. They hit it off for two reasons. Their husbands worked together, and their sons were born only 19 days apart. So they had a lot of common interests. One evening, Claire kept glancing at her watch. She was outside waiting for work. Why not? The weather's so nice, it's summer, it's the second battle. Mommy was in no hurry to come home. We can talk about women's things, her new friend said as she looked at the dial. What are you doing, Claire? I'm impatient. Are you waiting for your husband so insistently? But something began to be delayed almost every day. The owner of that auto body shop is getting all worked up over these second shifts. Second shifts? The young woman asked in surprise. Mine has been home for 3 hours, and before my walk with my son went to the supermarket. There is a lock on the gate of the car service center, and the alarm button is blinking. No one's been there for a long time, everything's locked up. My husband says people are on vacation. There's a lot less customers. Claire couldn't believe her ears. The lock's just like a lock, she stuttered. I'm telling you, there's hardly any orders. My husband even sometimes comes home from lunch to take a bath. Can't get him outside with the stroller. Claire's eyes darkened, cat's mute in her soul, leaving sharp scratches of doubt. She quickly picked Cameron up from the sandbox and ran home without even saying goodbye. Her phone calls were not answered by Robin. The caller was out of range. Her mind was a swarm of suspicions and fears. Now she'd just wait for him to get home from work or wherever he was and set things straight. Robin didn't come home that night. I spent the night without sleep. Cameron was fidgeting in his crib. It was as if he could sense that Mommy was worried about something. Robin showed up around noon. Claire, we need to talk, the man announced in a strange, muffled voice. I was tired of lying and twisting. Why do you have to lie every day? Said Robin. I'm in love with another woman. I'm going to pack my things and go to her. Claire felt as if the ground had fallen out from under her feet. Who had said those words now? Her Robin, who had been trying to win her favor for so long. Yes, this is a dream. It couldn't be, because it could never be. Tired, she returned and asked meekly, You're in trouble at work. So you made it all up. Dinner will be ready soon. Let's eat, rest, calm down. Robin stared at his wife with undisguised surprise. Couldn't she hear him? What kind of lunch could there be if he said such things to her? After all, he didn't want to use harsh, cruel words to Claire. He drew air into his lungs and repeated dickishly, Claire, there will be no more lunches. I'm leaving you forever. Our marriage was a mistake. I realize that now. Once again, Claire felt like she was delusional. It was him, her beloved husband, her first man, the father of her son. She looked around helplessly for some moral support. Her legs shook, her eyes swam before her eyes. Was her world going to collapse so suddenly on nothing? What other beloved woman was Robin talking about? Tears sprang from her eyes. She made an effort and rushed to her love's defense for the third time. "Robin, what's the story?" "You're telling me a story? Look at me. It's me, you're Claire. And you're my bestie. Do you remember how heroic you were in getting us tickets to that famous play? And the first time you tried to kiss me in the driveway? And I kept resisting. She didn't know what facts from their shared past she could bring to his argument. He can't leave me. It's nothing. A mistake, temporary oblivion. Even if he does have a crush on someone, they'll get over it together, and he'll be back in the family." But Robin looked at her with empty, cold eyes. He pushed away her attempt to hug him. He moved determinedly into the hallway where their large family suitcase was stored on the mezzanine. Then suddenly he gritted his teeth angrily. "How to live I am bored with my dull, gray love, with the eternal nagging for correctness. I'm already sick of you. Not a drop of fire, fantasy, desire to somehow diversify our relationship. Just boring submissiveness spiced with sweet tenderness. What do you know about what a true lover should be? Claire." His last words struck her heart like a hot iron. What's happening right now is a nightmare. She was about to wake up and everything would be the same. Claire woke up to the sound of the bedroom door slamming shut, a shriek Cameron, and she rushed to her frightened son. She hugged his curly head, kissed his chubby cheeks, nuzzled her nose into his nose, which told her, in bitter bewilderment, that her family life had just come to an abrupt end. She didn't want to live, didn't want to think about anything. When Claire's parents returned from work that evening, they found the young woman in complete prostration. Cameron was quietly fiddling in his playpen, surrounded by a mountain of toys, and his mother lay silent, staring blankly at the ceiling. She had suddenly aged 10 years. It happens, but usually temporarily. There was such a stamp of distress on her face that her father and mother looked at her with horror. The daughter now looked like a living, unconcerned dead man. What could have happened while they were away from home? To their persistent questions she had so far refused to answer. Claire grieved over her family misfortune. For 3 days she hadn't eaten, hardly drank anything, only got up to go to the bathroom. With enviable persistence, she returned to the couch, to the pillow and the traces of tears. Grandma even had to take time off work to be with Cameron. The daughter wouldn't even pay attention to him. Couldn't talk, didn't want to explain anything. But her parents had already realized that her gloomy stupor was related to Robin's disappearance from the house. They wanted to look for Robin at his parents' house, but Claire looked at them so much that they wouldn't budge. The young people themselves would figure out what the problem was between them. On the 4th day, Claire finally crawled out of her hiding place and started talking to her father and mother. "I'm filing for divorce. It's out of the question. And I want to go back to school as soon as Cameron's 2. I'll have to find a good nursery. Will you help me?" Of course they supported her, assured her they'd always be there for her. They listened to her story of what had happened in her family, reassured her as best they could. Claire was a bit like a robot now. She lived by inertia, fiddled with her son, did something machine-like around the house, but her eyes remained dead. It seemed that the evil accidents of fate had trampled down her faith in good things. She no longer trusted men now. If she had been betrayed by the one who had spent so much time looking for mutual love in her, what could others do? Robin had started seeing Hannah again about a month before his tough talk with his wife. The woman found him at a car service center, stunned by the news. "Guys, your accomplices from the ATO zone threw their boss, they'll be in jail again. And now they are free birds. They want a beautiful life. They think you owe them. They can't clean up their tongue. They can't clean up their tongue. They kept you behind your teeth. Even in your tangential case, you didn't pass. They want to go back to their old trade. But the odds will be different now. You're with them and the whole process from start to finish will participate in the car service business. I'm getting good at it. I got a couple of garages in mind. In them, You will decide the fate of each prey, what to dismantle into parts, where the number on the body rebid and resell. Robin's soul split in two at these words. On the one hand, he was glad to see Hannah again. Claire had been good, but so quiet and peaceful that his cheekbones were starting to droop with longing. He knew by heart how she'd behave with him, and he'd forgotten every time out of boredom. Like warm, like tender, but all childishly naive. No fire and passion, no surprises. Obedient and overzealous. He still remembered how Hannah had involved him in a new plot every time, where each of them had interesting roles to play. On the other hand, associating with former so-called co-workers was dangerous. It would be too high a price to pay for the pleasure of not counting money again. Hannah, meanwhile, was watching his reaction to this conversation and grinned to herself as soon as she saw the greedy glint of unconcealed desire in his eyes. Robin had slammed the hook. She was sure of it. But success couldn't be dismissed out of hand. She knew how to secure it in the safest way possible, so she went straight to the bank. "I've missed you, my sweet, yet daring boy. But you're not a boy anymore, army family son. I followed your life closely from afar. I've always been interested in you. And now you're all grown up and handsome, and you make me want to be near you again. Or do you mind?" He didn't mind at all. Now it even seemed to him that he had been writing his book of life on a draft, and only now he would start again from scratch. They were in Hannah's apartment in half an hour. He was ready to be her slave again, to get any kind of money, to fulfill her whims, as long as she didn't let him go again. He didn't remember that he had to go home to his wife and son. He would stay with her now for good. But the woman cooled his ardor. "Kitten, I don't want that, and I'll give you time to think about it, even if I turn out to be the last bitch. The remnants of humanity are still alive in me. It was good teachers that made me this way. After several abortions from our leader, I can't have children. But that doesn't mean I don't want to experience the happiness of motherhood too. You men always come here for one thing. No one knows how to look into my soul. So now you, who went to your family, must decide who you want to be with. I'll give you a month. During this time, the boys and I will solve technical matters with the site for cars, make a list of vehicles, so that they are already in mind. Repeating past mistakes of thoughtlessness is no longer an option." Robin didn't want to go home, to think about why he had come home so late, to look Claire in the eye, and certainly not to fulfill his marital duty. His wife was a pretty, affectionate woman, but he realized after marriage that his first fatal school love for Hannah ended long ago, even at the desk where they were preparing for final exams together. Everything between them later had been an attempt to distract himself from Hannah, to tear her from his heart. Somewhere it had fallen in again as soon as he'd seen her today. He would definitely never let her go from him now, at any cost. At home at dinner, eyes downcast to the floor, sluggishly picking at a chicken leg, refusing his favorite salad. For the first time he looked at his son with some distaste, how he would have liked a child with his red-headed bestie, not this well-mannered, proper Claire. Alliances were not to her liking. She'd gone to bed with him like a sweetheart and married him in a hurry. Where the hell did she put her Valentine and Valentine nonsense? Shifter Hunter Hannah is the real deal. He missed her like crazy already. The day after tomorrow, they're going on a case. They decided to start big with a cool, dark Maybach. Hannah liked to go big. He wanted to get back at one of his former admirers who'd declared after a night with her that she was dirty and no match for him. He used her a couple times and tossed her in the trash like a piece of junk. He didn't even thank her with gifts like other lovers. He thought he'd honored her too much already. Hannah felt particularly hurt by his behavior. She thought of her revenge even when he almost threw her out of the luxury car on the road, adding, "A lot of self-importance. You think you can smell it on me. If I wanted to buy a small car for a woman, as you want, you wouldn't be able to afford it. But in reality, it's cheap. I can always find one like that." No one ever knew what went on inside Hannah. but her gut was scorched empty. There weren't even any coals left. So many she'd been through, so many she'd lost. She'd lost count long ago. Always drunk, the same red-haired, beautiful mother. A stepfather who showed her the way into the world of sensual pleasure. High school gym teacher. Struck out with a local gang leader, made her way into the youth gang. She went to see him on a date, and he kept joking about it. "Don't wait up for me, right? I won't punish you. I understand that it's bad for a woman without a man's caress. When I come back, so you'll be with me again. In the meantime, take a walk." I've survived without a man's presence. Only while she was with Robin, a young boy. But even he soon bored her with his puppyish devotion. She didn't need him now, except for business. She waved her finger, and he was ready to do anything for her again. But would it make her happy? I don't think so. She's long since lost all feeling. She turned into a doll only when she holds a present and a new trinket in her hands. She comes to life for a moment, then falls back into the abyss of memory. Operation Maybach went well. The owner of the expensive foreign car was too sure of his greatness. The car didn't even need to be opened. Its owner had forgotten the card without key access to the ignition button on the bar. Hannah knew perfectly well where he liked to stop for a glass or two of cognac with lemon and sugar. Robin chanted the signal while the victim was getting drunk. After that, it was all a matter of technique. Only a little damage to the wheels on the corner, and the car was so. Pity about the bird. It was a beauty that no one had the heart to ruin. But Hannah was ruthless. She'd shine before her time with such an expensive toy, and half the town would know her. And so do the inmates of my favorite prison. We'll resell it in another town. It'll be used for parts. There are already buyers who want to upgrade their cars. Yeah, the profit margin will be a lot less, but it'll do for now. Learn. It's a start. This won't be our last car haul. The men didn't dare listen to their leader's friend, and they were far less clever than Hannah, who had a marvelous knack for life, and even Robin, who had completed at least 10 years of school. The procedure of disassembly of all the units with the help of Hintz and Robin's participation was carried out as smoothly as possible. A week later, they were already joking together in the restaurant, celebrating the successful deal. After the party, Robin looked hopefully at his beloved. "I miss you, Hannah. I can't think of anything else." But she just glared back at him and said, "Look at the calendar. There's a circle circled in bold red felt tip pen. 20 days you still have to think, and then either with me or with me to the end. Yeah, I've made up my mind, the moment I saw you again and followed you." But Hannah was adamant. She knew Robin wasn't going anywhere, so she was in no hurry to play family with him. The first car was followed by a second, then a fifth, then a fifth, then a 10th. The criminal ensemble had already lost count. Robin left his wife, quit the car service. Greed was pushing him, taking over, driving him around. Money always seemed tight. In between jobs, they'd binge. Sometimes Robin tried to remember that it would take a long time to fall asleep. His parents always felt sorry for him and didn't understand how he could abandon such a wonderful family and a good woman. And he was all trying grass, sinking lower and lower to the bottom after his red-haired abnormal love. Claire and Robin divorced then surprisingly quickly, without any delays. Claire herself and her parents had insisted that Robin give up their son. They promised that they wouldn't press him for child support. He signed the papers without looking at them, without reading a line. The women found Cameron a great private preschool with a strong group. Her parents became increasingly insistent on sending Claire to the capital city. How long could her sabbatical last? It was time for the student to return to her studies. For the remaining years, she tossed between the institute and her son. Cameron grew up fast, a bright little chatterbox. Claire called him my sweet parrot. She met her ex-husband by chance only once. He was all wrinkled and unattractive, hungover by all accounts. Where had his former statuesque good looks gone? He looked much older than his 23 years. You'd never tell from their looks that they'd once been in the same class. Claire, on the other hand, had blossomed and looked beautiful. In their final year, they had an internship and she lived alone in the dormitory. She wore a stewardess uniform, the beauty of which was added by her eyes burning with excitement. She did not give up her dream to master the Asian direction in air communication. She went to her cherished goal so purposefully that the teachers only marveled at how deeply she could master quite complex foreign languages and scripts. They decided to encourage the successful student. After defending her diploma, she was sent to a transportation company that carries out air transportation of passengers to China. The minimum program in the profession was closed on excellent. All significant routes of airliners flying to Asia, of course, did not start in the regional town where Claire studied the future profession. The destination in her allocation was the large city of Seattle, the main city in their region. At the family council, it was decided that little Cameron would stay with his grandparents in the stewardess's hometown, while she would settle in Seattle, get a little on her feet at work and at home. The airline welcomed the new employee with a modern design, gleaming metal and glass, and a buzz of lively voices. Claire had an interview with the head of department and an introduction to the corporate rules. A knock on the door was answered by what appeared to Claire to be a soft voice with a slight accent. "Come in, freely." A man of medium height and Asian appearance came out from behind the desk to meet Claire. Slanted, intelligent eyes looked inquisitive, but his appearance was not formidable. Rather, it was more disposing. He held out his hand to her. "My name is Bill. I don't need a middle name, because it's too hard for me to pronounce. According to your credentials, you're at my disposal as a stewardess on flights to Beijing. Come on. I'll introduce you to the girls who are here in the office now." Claire watched him move. He had the strength of a warrior and the grace of a panther at the same time. She thought to herself, Asian men are seriously different from our Americans. Bill turned around with a slight smile, as if anticipating her further questions. "I prefer to tell you about myself. I have been living in America for a long time, practically since I was born. My father is American, my mother is Chinese. Does it surprise you that I call America my country? I really do. Seattle was the city where I grew up, got my education, made my career." Claire was very surprised that her first boss had ever talked to her about himself, but he immediately explained his behavior. "I am a follower of Confucius's philosophy. I build my life on the principles he bequeathed in his writings: respect for people, loyalty, virtue, righteousness, the pursuit of knowledge, high moral principles. If you are willing to accept these tenets of his, we can work together." Oh my God, Claire thought. Confucius is all I need right now. How lucky I am to have strange men. One next to me didn't want to obey any moral laws. The other has made morality a virtue. Now I'll have to adapt to these intricate philosophical corporate rules. In the stewardess's lounge, Claire was again confronted with the philosophy of Confucius. A beautiful, she'd even say classy, poster hung across the wall that read, "Pick a job you like and you'll never have to work a day in your life." I'd have to agree with that, Claire decided to herself, and began to get to know her co-workers. And then the flights came running, the airliners flew. 8 on the road, a break and back again. Claire soon had everything mixed up, where it was night, where it was day, where it was Monday, where it was Friday. Occasionally she'd break out to her parents' house, where a grown Cameron missed her more and more. As her son's warm hands cradled her head, he whispered softly in her ear, "Mommy, Grandpa and I have already learned the letter A. It looks like a ladder. And the rest of the letters we will still learn." The woman's heart was melting, turning into pliable wax. But she soberly realized that with her flight schedule, taking her son to Los Angeles would be a mistake. Maybe then, closer to high school, he'll grow up even more, and will connect, Claire thought. After another visit from her parents, Claire came down with the worst of the flu. Her rented apartment was close to the office and the airfield. She worked the flight smoothly, and then realized on the ground that her temperature was almost approaching the 40-degree mark. She was shaking, her teeth were chattering from the heat, and she could only whisper in a broken voice. "I don't feel well. Everything in front of me is floating." And she passed out. She remembered the rest, vaguely how she found herself at home, how some woman in a medical uniform leaned over her. "Was it an ambulance? Any ambulance?" Claire asked in a weak voice. "You're home," the woman replied. Claire was in a slumber for 3 days, remembering nothing but someone's hands bringing her some herbal tea. Going to the bathroom, literally up the wall, the same strong, gentle hands holding her by the waist. When she woke up on the wide bed, Bill was sleeping next to her. Claire jumped up in surprise. Claire's mind flashed. Where did he come from? Was he really the one who's been taking care of me all this time? I don't remember a thing. At that instant, after a slight rustle, her superior opened his eyes, put his finger warningly to his lips, and said quietly, "Don't ask anything. I found the keys to your apartment in your purse. After you had been given first aid in the cause of your fainting, I took the liberty of escorting you home. You were barely conscious." My wife gaily continued. "She was gone for good when I couldn't get her out of an equally bad flu. Burned out from the high fever. Her heart couldn't take the strain. She had just recently given birth to our daughter then and was still breastfeeding her. I couldn't. There was nothing I could do. Now our daughter is growing up half-orphaned. I've looked at your file, Claire. You have a son, Cameron. He can't be like my little girl. Lie down. The doctor was here this morning. He told me the crisis was over." Claire later learned that Bill had taken a family leave from work. His daughter was now at a children's sanatorium with her daycare center, and no one was waiting for him at home. They had befriended a boss who didn't care if there was gossip at work, what management had to say, or how subordinates would react. Bill explained to Claire in no uncertain terms. "You look like Gail. My heart goes out to you. I can't help it. It doesn't do you any favors. When you meet the man you love, I'll disappear. Until then, just let me be there for you." A thought flashed through Claire's mind, a kind of déjà vu. Misalliance again, as she called the relationship between somewhat different people. The higher powers want a man of a different culture, faith, religion, a fan of Confucius ideas with strange, by her standards, views on life to be around. Is it her destiny to be liked by men from other worlds? At that time, in the city where Claire's parents lived, a criminal gang was celebrating the leader's release from prison in a fancy restaurant. The table, lavishly laden with food, was crowded. Everyone wanted to show respect to their idol. This served time from call to call. In the zone, he often behaved so impudently that he blocked all possibilities to go out earlier on parole to freedom. It seemed to him that in such behavior there was a certain glamour and courage. Hannah sat next to him, grinning, his hand resting carelessly on her shoulder. Robin was the only one who wasn't having fun in all this frenzy. He realized that now he would be pushed far and away. His period of pleasure was over. And was it ever a period? The man quietly got out from behind the desk and went out into the lobby, where he came across a huge mirror. Staring into it, the smooth surface glistening in the light of the lamps, he saw what he had become. A miserable, hunched, pale man with a dull face on which there was no liveliness or joy. What had he wasted his life on? After Claire's illness, Bill acted as if they were now at work together. Everyone took this news for granted. The staff was not envious or nosy. The woman was sure that everyone thought that she and Bill had been close for a long time. And she, after Robin's rebuff about her inexperience in bed, was afraid to return to this area of relations between a man and a woman. On vacation, she brought the now-grown Cameron and Jonathan to Pittsburgh. They took many walks as a foursome, she with Lucinda, Sophia with her daughter Emma. He was very unlike American men, despite growing up in Russia. Apparently, his Chinese mother still managed to instill in him a love of mysterious China, where there is the Great Wall of China. There are so many inhabitants there that some of them live in big cities, not even in one-room apartments, but in some niches, similar to a small pencil case. A bed, a nightstand next to it, that's all the wealth. Claire flew to China regularly, but she always asked herself to make a schedule in such a way as to have time to visit her parents and son in this exotic country. She never really got to know it. Working as a stewardess no longer seemed as romantic as it used to be. After long flights, she was mercilessly tired, and there were a lot of capricious passengers. The woman's life was becoming more and more like a banal routine. Bill froze in mute expectation, and the relationship did not take the initiative, leaving the final decision to her. He touched her hands casually. He'd give her his when she got out of the car, and as time went on, she wondered, was he really insensitive? So she decided to step into the same river twice. Once, after a semblance of a family dinner together in a restaurant, she suggested that he not go home, where there was a nanny, but invited him to her place for a nightcap. He was a wise man and took her hint. "Claire," he said in the morning, "now you know me. I sincerely hope you had a good time with me. Let's think about legitimizing our relationship. I recently bought a small but very cozy house in the suburbs. I suppose the four of us will be perfectly comfortable there. But I'd like to have children with you. People will judge that these two do not burn with mutual passion, do not throw themselves into the maelstrom of love. Oh, come on. Not all marriages are made in heaven. Some marriages are made with mutual friendship and reason. Two people walk through life hand in hand." Likewise, without thinking, Claire never later regretted her choice. Bill was the epitome of warmth, kindness, loyalty, gentleness. On the anniversary of the already old designer in a small provincial town gathered his entire family, his beloved, faithful wife, daughter with her husband, their 4 children. He had something to be proud of. His grandchildren were all like a match. The eldest, Cameron, was already in the 5th grade, followed by Emma in the 4th grade. The twins Jonathan and Michael were younger. They were also in kindergarten. Their mother had completely abandoned her profession as a flight attendant, devoting herself entirely to the younger generation. She could afford it. Her husband Bill had been the director of a transportation company for several years. He loved his large family. He spoiled both his wife and the boys with enthusiasm. After the guests left, Claire and her mother cleaned up the dishes and whispered in the kitchen. The older woman was telling her daughter about a recent incident. "A ragged, dirty man with shaky hands knocked on our door late one night. I hardly recognized him as Robin. He was begging, 'Give me money for a bottle.' My soul is burning. I can't bear it. My parents and brother won't give me a penny. I see you've already drunk your soul, Robin. Get out of here before I call my husband. Anybody can poke you with a finger and knock you down," I said. "What do you know about life?" said her former son-in-law and father of her eldest grandson. "I burned myself on the fire of love, but now I'm responsible for my shitty fate. At least pour me a glass out of the goodness of your heart." I gave him a whole bottle of vodka, Claire's mother confessed. He's a missing person, after all. Claire thought again and went to put the clean dishes in the cupboard. Everyone chooses his or her own path. Some of them take the curve, some of them take the hard but straight road. Now, who is to blame for all this? She stopped thinking and went to put the children to bed. She herself had everything worked out just right. Though she did not become for her man the ideal Valentina, the right one who lives in a fictional play. But here she is, real and happy. George sat at the kitchen table and smoked one cigarette after another near the open window. It had been freezing since mid-January, but the cold penetrating from the street into the apartment did not bother the man. He was in such a state that such trifles did not bother him now. Outside the window, a gray, dull dawn was dawning. The meeting with the notary at 11. There was still plenty of time. Vanessa slept sweetly in the bedroom, wrapped in warm blankets. Unlike George, she was clearly happy about the whole situation. And that was strangely repulsive to him. Until a couple months ago, George had thought this girl was perfect. Beautiful, determined, ambitious, smart. She's got a way with words. When necessary, she'll make a joke. When necessary, she'll put you in your place. And most importantly, gentle and loving. A real woman. Next to such men feel strong, necessary. Not like Madison. Eric Madison. George's heart ached again. His wife, after all. She wasn't a stranger to him at all. Despite Vanessa's presence, despite everything that had been going on lately. Madison. Charlotte. Queen Madison. They met while they were still students. The girl was a finance and economics major. George was a law student. No, the guy never particularly dreamed of becoming a lawyer. Since childhood, he read a lot. He especially liked stories about relationships. Love, passion, hate, fear. It was interesting to unravel the intentions of the characters, to speculate about why they acted in this or that way. No wonder that his essays on literature were the most profound and interesting. The teacher even read out some fragments in front of the class. George also drew a lot. His desk drawer was full of sketchbooks, sketches, all kinds of drawings. Fantastic creatures, courageous warriors, just unusual ornaments. Drawing was soothing, calming, and time-consuming. George himself did not understand how it happened he sat down at the table to do algebra. He distracted himself for a minute to finish drawing another character, and that was it. He fell out of reality. He came to his senses, and only then realized with surprise that he had spent several hours drawing. George was clearly a creative person, but his parents were not happy about it. Mother and father, it seems, agreed only in one thing. Both believed that the son needs a serious profession. Did they agree on anything? And, well, the father had some connections. And so George ended up at a prestigious law school. True, he wasn't the least bit interested in his studies. But what can you do? Parents said that you must study, otherwise you will not achieve anything in life. And George was used to believe his parents and obey them. But at university, he met Madison. George noticed her during his freshman year. She was interesting looking, not beautiful? No. But there was something aristocratic about her. They didn't call her Queen Madison for nothing. Snow-white skin, beautiful intelligent eyes of the darkest shade, shiny black hair, always smoothly styled, clear cheekbones, a nose with a slight hump and a confident line of lips, and most importantly, regal posture and sharp, but still surprisingly graceful movements. Even later, George learned that Madison as a child attended a ballet studio, which hated with all his soul. Parents insisted, say, the girl must move beautifully. And Madison worked her ass off in ballet shoes all the time she was supposed to. George really understood her. His parents also knew what was best for him. Madison was always busy. She didn't just look like a businesswoman. She was one, participating in some contests and conferences, working part-time for the university. George didn't know how he had gotten so much information about this girl. She didn't notice him at all, didn't even know about the existence of such a modest, quiet guy. And George, no, he wasn't in love with her. He was attracted to a completely different type of girl, but for some reason he wouldn't let Madison out of his sight. George was in his 4th year of college. It was summer weather. The middle of May, the time of credits, the time to get admission to the session. The boy went out for a walk to the ice cream stand. Since morning, he had been reading a thick notebook with notes, preparing for tomorrow's test. He decided to take a break. He was about to round the corner of the neighboring house when he heard behind him a loud growl from somewhere far away and a startled exhalation. That sound was what made George turn around. He hadn't expected to see this at all. Madison. Before, the guy had only seen her within the walls of the university. George knew that the girl lived somewhere in the center, renting an apartment, since she herself was not local. From somewhere, either from a village or from a regional town. And here she was, right next to George's house. It's strange, but there was no way to ponder it for long. Two large dogs approached Madison. There had been a lot of stray dogs around here lately. There was a construction site nearby, so the animals lived somewhere behind the fence. The builders kind of fed them at first, but then construction stopped. Temporarily or permanently. George didn't know. And now hungry packs were roaming the neighborhood. There were attacks on people. Just now, two dogs were attacking Madison. The girl saw the look in the boy's eyes. And there was so much hope in her eyes that George, always a little cowardly and indecisive, just couldn't do otherwise. He grabbed a large boulder off the ground and headed straight for the dogs. He thought that if the dogs came at him, at least one of them would be able to hit him over the head with the rock. Maybe even stun the beast for a while. But then what would he do? There's still the other dog. There was no time to think about that. Just like that, George had become a hero. The boy approached Madison and asked, trying to keep his voice firm, not shaking. "Are you okay? They didn't do anything to you?" No, she shook her head, looking at her savior gratefully. "Thank you very much. I was confused." The girl was transforming from a confused and frightened, fragile victim into herself, into Queen Madison. Madison's gaze became firm, her movements and voice became confident. "Yeah, we've got some hungry dogs running around because of the frozen construction site, attacking a lot of people," the girl sighed. "I feel sorry for them, on the one hand. In the end, it's all our fault, humans. Listen, were you in a hurry?" "No," honestly, George replied. "Then can I ask you to walk me to 15 Lipovaya, please? I'm confused about the neighborhood. And I'm afraid of running into dogs again, to be honest. Can you walk me?" George felt like a real hero. Queen Madison herself was counting on him. "Oh my gosh. I will, of course." George deliberately took Madison the long way, even though he could have taken a shortcut through the courtyards. It was just nice to walk and talk to her like that. Madison turned out to be a wonderful conversationalist, intelligent, attentive, understanding. It turned out they liked the same books. Who knew? But no matter how George looped Lipovaya, 15 eventually grew in front of the two companions. "Well, here we are. Thank you again. I'm with the same group. We're studying together for a test." "All right," Madison said. "I'm at Orakov State University. Finance and economics?" I know, George smiled, pleased with the effect. Madison was surprised. "How do you know?" "I go to law school there, too. I've just seen you around, that's all. By the way, I have a midterm tomorrow, too." Wow, what a small world. "It's not a small world, it's our Orakovskaya." Madison smiled charmingly and disappeared down the driveway. That day, George couldn't think of anything but Madison's deep, dark eyes. At least he was almost ready for his midterm. He'd never had any romantic feelings for this girl before, even though he'd known her, seen her, kept her in his sights. And now that they'd talked, Madison was like a spell on him. It was her pleasant, literate speech, her respectful attitude, her unexpected weakness, her fear of stray dogs. Madison was now drawing George to her like a magnet. The guy hoped they would see each other at the university the very next day. And so they did. Not entirely by accident, though. George specifically went to the floor where the economists were taking their exams. As if by accident, he walked past the classroom where the students were crowded. And he saw Madison. She also noticed him, nodded to the guy, and even hurried to meet him. At first, George and Madison were just friends, talking and walking together a lot. They even went to the movies for movies they both looked forward to. Luckily, they had specific tastes, so they went to such sessions, just the two of them, without extra eyes and ears. George admired Madison, savored her closeness. He wanted very much to take her hand, maybe even kiss it. But she was acting like a friend, like a buddy, and the guy was afraid of ruining everything. That's why he didn't show his feelings. It was better to remain friends than to feel awkward every time they met. He didn't want to destroy the warm buddy relationship that had already emerged. And then they found themselves at a common student party, a disco in honor of the end of the next academic year. Ahead was the 5th year, graduation. Almost the whole road to higher education is behind them. There was much to celebrate. George watched Madison dancing with the other guys and was wildly jealous. No, the girl didn't owe him anything. They weren't even considered a couple. George himself was free to dance with whomever he wanted, but these guys were hugging Madison in the dance. They made him resentful and furious. They called George names, but he didn't show it. He joked and laughed with his friends. He even entered some silly contests. And then, late in the evening when everything was over, Madison herself approached George. The guy noticed that the girl wasn't exactly sober. Officially, strong drinks were forbidden at this party, but of course they were actually present. "Don't you like me at all?" Madison asked with stunning directness. "Of course you do," George said, confused. He hadn't expected to hear that. "I mean, as a girl," Madison explained. "I'm not pretty, but I'm not ugly. Thin lips, tall, too thin. No shape. Do you like other girls?" And Madison was almost right. Until a few months ago, George did like other girls, so-called model girls. But now there was no one prettier or more attractive to him than Madison. I guess now was as good a time as any to tell him that. But for some reason, he couldn't find the right words. Madison, on the other hand, was very talkative. "Haven't you noticed how I feel about you? But we talk so much. And all the time I've been waiting for some sign from you that would make me think you like me too. But all you see in me is a friend, and now I've ruined everything." George shook his head negatively, glaring at the girl. "So be it. At least I'll finally tell you what I think. I'm in love, George, with you. Can you believe it? I always thought I liked guys who were more masculine, brutal, like athletes. I tried to hang out with this basketball player, and he turned out to be a fool. And all the other guys I hung out with were just as stupid. And you're not. You're different. Smart, understanding, real." George smiled. It was nice to hear Madison say that. He didn't know what to say in response, so he just put his arms around her, pulling her against him. The girl rested her head on his shoulder and continued her monologue. "I danced with all those people tonight too, didn't I? Only because of you. Only to make you jealous. But you remained indifferent. It hurt so much." "You don't understand," George sighed. "You're just like me." "What do you mean?" Madison pulled away and looked into George's eyes with interest. And then he did what he'd dreamed of doing for so long. George kissed the girl. They started dating. Quiet, modest law student and bright, successful beauty Madison, so different in temperament and character, but at the same time very similar in many ways. They had so many common, interesting topics of conversation, so many joint activities that both of them enjoyed. George and Madison really were like two halves of the same whole. It was Madison who helped George decide what he really wanted to do with his life. "You're a born psychologist," she once said. "You have a keen sense of people, interested in the feelings and thoughts of others. Try it, take a course. Maybe you'll get somewhere." And George listened. After graduation, he got a job at a law firm, did boring, routine work, got a pittance, and at the same time studied to be an online psychologist. That's what he really enjoyed. This was what he was really passionate about. I told you, Madison smiled smugly. I'm almost never wrong. Madison herself, meanwhile, was actively building her own business. She already owned an attire. This choice was not accidental. At school, Madison always studied on excellent, and only her hands were growing out of the wrong place, as the girl herself expressed it. The only problem she had was with labor lessons, where it was necessary to sew and the girl could not do it. Madison tried very hard, but all the same, the products of her classmates came out much more beautiful and neat. Oh, I'm so bad with my hands. The technology teacher sighed over her students' creations. No, it's not your thing. And how will you live, such an inept? I'm going to open my own attire, Madison promised her teacher. Of course, you'll marry a prince and become a millionaire. Is that what you all think when you're young? The teacher didn't believe the girl, but she did grow up and opened an outlier. George supported Madison, and she supported him. Madison developed the attire, and George tried himself as a psychologist, began to counsel people. They lived together in a rented apartment. They didn't talk about marriage, but it was implied in the future, as if by itself. And then, Madison's business trip abroad came out of the blue. She had an opportunity to study at a prestigious business school. But it meant a long separation. It's such a chance. You have no idea, Madison said, her eyes burning with excitement. George, of course, was happy for his beloved, but he was also worried. After all, it was not a matter of 1 month or even 6 months. Madison was to spend about 2 years abroad. How would that affect their relationship? For some reason, George had thought she'd find someone there and wouldn't want to go back at all. But he was wrong. The relationship really didn't stand the test of distance. But the blame for this was not on Madison. For the first time after his beloved left, George wasn't himself. He missed her so much. He'd missed her desperately from the moment he'd left Madison at the airport. He'd been doing everything on autopilot, working in his law office, counseling clients as a psychologist. Did they socialize? Sure, almost every night. Madison looked tired but happy and enthusiastic. I like everything teachers, practical classes, even hours-long lectures. The girl shared her impressions with George. As usual, he spoke encouraging words and supported her. As time went on, the video sessions became increasingly rare. There was no time for Madison. The course was intense. Sometimes she just didn't have the time or energy to talk to George. He, of course, was getting himself worked up. It seemed to him that Madison had someone else. Their conversations were too superficial, infrequent, and short. Being a psychologist, George realized that it was his complexes. His distrust of Madison and fear of losing her all stemmed from insecurity. It seemed to George that there are plenty of young men around who are both prettier and more successful than he is. Of course, Madison compares and may be thinking about starting a relationship with someone else, someone more deserving. When Madison was around, he saw her eyes full of tenderness and acceptance, felt her warmth and sympathy. But now she was far away, and George began to think that Madison didn't love him at all, that she was worthy of more, that he wasn't up to her level. Madison is a successful beauty who has already started her own business. While she is studying abroad, the business is run by the manager, a former classmate of the girl, the same friend on the way to which Madison was attacked by dogs. And him. He's just a lowly lawyer with a salary of 30,000 rubles and an aspiring psychologist. It remains to be seen if he'll succeed in either of those fields. At this very moment in the life of George appeared Charlotte, a girl who recently broke up with a young man and now felt broken and depressed. That's why she turned to a psychologist. George consulted online. His clients were from different cities, but it so happened that Charlotte was his neighbor. She lived literally 2 blocks away. George realized this when he saw the view outside the window behind the beautiful girl on the screen. Huge, disturbing eyes of an amazing violet hue, long brown hair, cute, and very pleasant facial features. Charlotte was so touching, so soft and feminine. She was not at all like Madison, who was rushing toward her goal and was used to sweeping away all obstacles in her way. Charlotte was 4 years younger than George. She was still in her 3rd year of university, and they had been dating for about 6 years, since high school. Charlotte was certain that they would marry soon. Except that the young man suddenly informed her that he was tired of their relationship. He's stuffy, bored, just bored. The guy wanted to make up for lost time to meet with different girls, to go out with friends nights away. It turns out that he felt deprived of all this because he had been dating Charlotte since 9th grade. For the girl, it was a blow. She worried, held on, looked for faults in herself that weren't there, and blamed herself. Eventually, someone advised the girl to consult a psychologist. Consultations with specialists were not cheap. They were beyond the student's means. But George, he was, after all, a novice psychologist, so his tariff quite satisfied Charlotte. That's how they met. George knew it was unprofessional, but he couldn't help himself. The pretty girl somehow immediately captivated his heart. He felt more confident and stronger around her than he did with Madison. She had long been the unspoken leader of their couple in all matters. Besides, she probably didn't have George to worry about right now, and he was tired of feeling not even 2nd, but 5th or 6th place. Charlotte needed him so much. She listened to him so attentively, and she actually felt better talking to him. All in all, it wasn't hard to get the young beauty to like him. Soon George and Charlotte moved their meetings offline. Their conversations resembled not the communication of a psychologist and a client, but a friendly chat. Then friendship naturally grew into something more, and they both needed it to feel needed, loved, exceptional. Soon Charlotte moved in with George. He didn't want to live a lie, so he told Madison everything honestly. It seemed to George that pain flashed in her eyes. Madison's lips trembled. Red blotches appeared on her cheeks. But she quickly pulled herself together, as she always did. "Well," Madison said, shaking her head, "this is unexpected news. Well, if that's your decision, I won't make a scene. We're both grown up and independent. Good luck with your new relationship." And Madison was off. And just like that, it was easy. No hard feelings, no accusations, no trying to find out the details. George sighed. It only confirmed his opinion that Madison had cooled off on him. Suddenly, that thought hurt. Still, Madison was someone special to George. Even after the breakup, he continued to think about her, even though he was fine with Charlotte. Charlotte seemed soft, malleable, pliable as warm wax. She had grown up in a small country town. Her family still lived there, so she had a somewhat patriarchal, traditional upbringing, and that was the beauty of it. Although as a psychologist, George realized that many of Charlotte's attitudes needed work. Charlotte was studying to be an economist. She'd lived in a dormitory before moving in with George. Her parents were not wealthy, so Charlotte could only rely on herself. She tried to study hard as she wanted to get an education, to get back on her feet. Studying before she met George was her first priority. But she fell in love, lost her head with a young psychologist, and therefore pushed everything to the second-plan: friends, lectures, exams, part-time work. Everything. George was flattered by this, of course. In turn, he tried to do something for Charlotte, worked more to buy her gifts, take the girl to restaurants and cafes, took on some of the household chores, which pleasantly surprised not accustomed to such behavior of men young lady. George bathed in love and admiration, enjoyed care and warmth. He had never felt so loved. Charlotte practically put him on a pedestal. Sometimes George was troubled by jealous thoughts. I wonder if she behaved the same way with her ex. Somehow it seemed she had. Caring and helpfulness were inherent in this girl's personality. Still, George thought about Madison. Such an interesting communication on equal terms he and Charlotte did not get. The girl often did not understand his jokes and almost never knew those authors or those movies that George told her about. and the man at such moments caught himself thinking that he still lacked Madison her wit, insight, directness. And then one day Charlotte told George that she was expecting a child, a very unexpected and untimely piece of news. Charlotte is still a student. George doesn't earn enough to support his family. He's just developing. He plans to study, gain new experience and knowledge. But if there is a baby, the development can be put on the cross. After all, training does not imply large earnings, and the family needs to be fed. George very cautiously suggested to Charlotte to make an abortion. It seemed to him that this was the best solution to all problems. The girl first took offense at him. First she yelled at George, which she had never done before. Then she cried. It was hard for George to look at her like that. He felt sorry for young Charlotte, who of course was also shocked by the news of her pregnancy. But George said, "Hey, don't cry. Do you hear me? Everything's going to be all right. We're going to be fine. You're not going to leave me, and you're not going to leave us now." No, of course not. George pulled her even tighter against him. It's a good thing she couldn't see the look on his face. Confused, upset. He didn't want this baby. He didn't want it at all. No, George saw himself as a father in the future, maybe even a father of many children. But now, it was too soon to start a family. George was living in a rented apartment, working at an unloved and low-paid job, and he was just starting out as a psychologist. And Charlotte, she was beautiful, tender, caring. But George did not think of tying his life with her. It was a pleasant, unburdensome relationship, necessary for both of them the moment they met. George felt as if he had fallen into the trap of decency. Raised from a young age by his mother and father, responsibility kept him from abandoning his own child. Charlotte recovered a little and even began to enjoy the pregnancy. George gained additional clients. Now he was working from dawn to dusk. He had to get the cushion ready for the baby's birth. Charlotte and George applied to the registry office. They decided to do without a lavish celebration, although the bride still dreamed of a beautiful white dress and a wedding with guests and contests. She shared this with George with a slight sadness in her voice. But the girl understood perfectly well they would need the money for the baby. There was no need for unnecessary spending in their situation. George felt inadequate again. He couldn't even fulfill his future wife's wish. Charlotte's a young girl. Of course she wants to feel like a princess at her own wedding. She's involved with a poor rabble-rouser. So she has to shrink and endure hardship from the start. Charlotte was very afraid to break the news of her pregnancy to her parents. You see, my parents were so happy that I got in. I am the first in the family with a higher education. I have so many hopes for me, and now I'll have to drop out. Why? Can I take a sabbatical during childbirth and then you study? No, I have a family now. I know what it's like, all the time it takes. I don't want to be a wife or a mom. School's going to have to wait, and that's why I'm afraid to tell my parents. But I have to tell them, and it's best not to delay. Charlotte decided to go home on New Year's Eve. George offered to accompany her to support her in her predicament, and the bride's parents should probably get to know her. The man was sure he would find the right words to calm Charlotte's overbearing father and her mother. He works as a psychologist for a reason. But the girl had other plans. No, I'd rather go to them myself the first time. No, you don't know my dad? He's a man who's in a hurry. He can say some nasty things to you. He can get a little handsy. George was relieved that it was up to him to offer. Charlotte said no. Well, she knows what's right. Let her really talk to her own people, prepare the ground. Charlotte left and disappeared. She didn't answer her phone. Must have been a bad connection in her small hometown. All she'd managed to do was call from the train station to say she'd arrived. And that was it. George wasn't worried. Why would Charlotte suddenly come home to her family after all? Maybe her parents wouldn't be thrilled that their student daughter would soon make them happy with grandchildren. But they won't beat her up. Grumble, and accept the situation. Especially since the father of the child does not refuse Charlotte and the baby. They're getting married soon. George was enjoying being alone. Turns out he was a little tired of Charlotte. At one point in his life, she was his salvation. Pulled him out of his troubled thoughts, surrounded him with warmth, inspired him. But now her care and helpfulness irritated him. As did the intrusive attention, the almost nocturnal gaze, and a lot of other things. When Charlotte did not arrive on the agreed day, George did worry. The girl was starting lectures, preparing for the session. She could not miss all this without a good reason. The girl's phone was still stubbornly silent. So George went to the university where Charlotte was studying, tracked down her group, talked to a few people. They didn't know what had happened. When George had given up hope, a girl caught up with him in the hallway. Funny-looking redhead, pigtails sticking out in all directions. Looking for July. You must be George, he nodded slowly. Helen, her friend. We're from the same town. She asked me to look you up. And here you are. That's lucky. What about Charlotte? Why hasn't she come back, do you know? Oh, it's a story, it's a nightmare. Charlotte's parents are, very strict. She's their pride. The smartest, most promising kid in the family. They were so excited about their daughter getting in. They bragged to everyone in town, thought she'd become a successful economist. And then you came along and ruined all their plans. Charlotte's father was furious when he heard about his daughter's plans. Pregnancy out of wedlock, more like a wedding. Charlotte was going to drop out of school. She was going to be a good wife, an ideal mother, a housewife, instead of conquering career heights. In general, the strict parent decided no wedding and similar tricks early, and personally escorted his daughter to the clinic, where the head doctor was his former classmate. Even before New Year's Eve, the girl had an operation solved, according to her parents, all the problems, so that the child was no longer. George collapsed upon hearing this. He had seen the joy with which Charlotte had waited for the baby, and he could imagine the state she was in now. What's so wild about it anyway? Charlotte's an adult. She can make her own decisions. What about him? He wasn't even asked for his opinion. That's the way it is with us, Helen shrugged. We're used to listening to our parents. There's no other way around it. And Charlotte didn't go against her mother's and father's wishes either. Through Helen, Charlotte asked him to tell George that it was over between them. She told him not to look for her or try to find out anything on his own. Charlotte would now be studying part-time from home under parental supervision so that nothing like this would ever happen again. That's all she asked me to tell you, Helen faltered, clearly uncomfortable with being the messenger of bad news. She also said that your relationship was a mistake, but she also wished you happiness in your personal life. Thanks to her, George shook his head and walked toward the university exit. Later at home, he thought about the whole situation and came to the conclusion that everything had happened for the best. George didn't feel bitter about the loss. He didn't even feel upset. On the contrary, there was a kind of joy because everything resolved itself without his participation. There would be no child with the family. And it wasn't his fault. Charlotte, of course, is very sorry. Such overbearing parents are not to be envied. On the other hand, it's her choice. She could go against her father if she wanted to. Charlotte knew that George would accept her, would not let her down. And yet she gave up a child and the man she loved. That's good. Life went on as usual. Suddenly her work as a psychologist began to bear fruit. And very generous. Soon George left the hated work in the office and gave himself completely to the soul of healing. In relationships, he was now more cautious. Romances happened, but the man did not allow any mental intimacy, and even more so the appearance of his partner's thoughts of children, family, and so on. He did not want it all yet. Or maybe the women were not the right ones. The man involuntarily compared them all to Madison, and each time the comparison was not in favor of another companion. They didn't measure up to Queen Madison, not at all. George seemed to feel quite happy and accomplished. His favorite high-paying job, his own apartment, a beautiful car. And yet something was missing. And then fate brought him back together with the one he had been thinking about all this time. By that time, George was already quite a successful and established man. He was counseling people online from all over the United States. There was even a waiting list for his sessions now. George's services were already expensive. The man periodically published books that sold out like hotcakes. Editions he illustrated by himself, so realized another of his talents artistic. Since childhood, George constantly drew something in albums: fantastic creatures, courageous superheroes, animals different. In general, it turned out well. Parents admired, of course, but strongly advised his son to do something more serious, something that will help him in the future, will not starve to death. And it turned out like this. Now George was even asked to illustrate other people's publications. The psychologist's profession was supplemented by a part-time job as a digital artist. He had to take a couple of courses to sharpen his skills. And now George was in high demand as an illustrator. He lived in his beautiful and stylish apartment, drove an expensive car, had savings. In general, he was rightly considered quite well-to-do by his 30-plus years of age. Many at his age have never dreamed of such a thing. George, going to the bar that night, had not expected this meeting. He'd thought Madison had been living somewhere in Los Angeles for a long time. She'd disappeared from social media, so George couldn't keep up with her like he used to. But he thought that with her ambitions, Charlotte has nothing to do in this city. It was too small a town for Queen Madison. But it was she who sat at the bar with her foot on the leg. She was grown up, even well-groomed, stylishly and expensively, but not pretentiously dressed. Impeccable taste, solemn-looking, the same bottomless, penetrating eyes, seeming quite black in the semi-darkness of the bar, and the shiny black hair flowing down her back. Madison usually wore her hair shorter. This was the first time George had seen her like this, and it was a look that suited Madison very well. Madison was here with her friends. They were sitting at the counter since there were no more tables available. They were having a lively discussion, laughing. George felt numb. At first, he even wanted to leave the bar quietly, to run away, because, well, if they met, there would be something to talk about. And George still felt guilty that he had been the cause of their breakup. His infidelity was to blame, to be honest. And the resentment was there, too. Madison hadn't even tried to find out then, which meant she was already completely indifferent to him. Maybe she'd even met someone there, in a faraway land. But soon George realized that he wasn't afraid of meeting Madison. On the contrary, he was attracted to her, drawn to her like a magnet, just as he had been in his youth. The man couldn't take his eyes off her. Every move she made, every feature of her appearance, everything evoked complete acceptance. Everything was almost native, his own. She seemed to feel his gaze, turned around. Their eyes met, and Madison smiled at him without a shadow of resentment, without a shadow of contempt. George got up from his seat and moved toward her. They talked all night until morning, retiring to the far end of the bar, where the music was quieter, to enjoy their conversation. And talked. Madison talked about how, living abroad, it was not easy for her, studying from morning till night, unsettled life. What admirers. She did not even think about novels. Simply no strength or time for it, was not purely physically. So George's speculation about other men was false. What did you say the other day about us breaking up? That you were seeing someone else? They knocked me off my game for a long time, Madison said. I even thought about dropping out of school, but then, of course, I pulled myself together. George looked into Madison's eyes and understood. He could feel how hard and sad it had been for her. The guilt was overwhelming him more and more. "Well, I got what I deserved for what I did," George sighed. "It's not for nothing they say about the boomerang of fate." And the man told about his situation with Charlotte. He didn't forget to mention that he'd been thinking about Madison all these years, and regret, desperately sorry for the breakup he'd initiated. "I felt like I wasn't good enough for you," Madison admitted. "I thought you needed someone stronger and more successful. And now? What do you think now? Are you worthy of me now?" The question made George hot. He knew Madison was asking for a reason. Was there really a 1 in a million chance that something between them was still possible? "I'm perfectly capable of handling a gorgeous woman like you right now," George said jokingly, but his eyes were serious. Madison smiled and kissed him herself. That's how they ended up together again. Madison and George had both already reached certain career heights. George was a sought-after psychologist, and Madison ran a chain of attires. Incidentally, the same labor teacher who had once looked down on her was now working for Madison. The owner of the network did not tell the new employee why she chose this particular area of business. But this turn of fate pleased her. The gestalt had finally come to a complete close. George and Madison decided to buy a house. They chose a cottage in a well-appointed village not far from the city. It seemed to both of them that such a place would be better for raising children. Children both George and Madison already felt quite ready for parenthood. The age is quite solid, the material base is created. What's the point of procrastination? To plan heirs began even at the stage of preparation for the wedding. Both went through doctors. George turned out to be perfectly healthy. Madison, on the other hand, had some problems. "I wish you'd been a mother sooner," the doctor shook his head. 5 or 6 years ago, everything would have been much easier. But your problems have progressed over the years. There's not much chance now. Madison was upset, of course, but as always, she quickly pulled herself together. She was used to the challenge, used to the struggle. And she thought she'd win this time, too. She always had. George was there for Madison in every way. He accompanied her to her medical appointments. He worked with her to find information about her condition and get her to see the best doctors. As the years went by, the desired pregnancy never came. Strong, unyielding Madison sometimes cried from helplessness. She wanted a baby so badly. So did George. He was ready to give up heirs, if only his wife was happy. George was frightened by Madison's confusion. It wasn't like her. In his world, this couldn't happen. Madison is strong, after all. She never cries, she always knows what to do. And all of a sudden, George tried his best to comfort his wife. When the doctors came to an unequivocal verdict that pregnancy was basically impossible unless a miracle happened, they had a serious conversation. "Madison, this has got to stop. Madison, stop torturing yourself. All these attempts are bad for your health and your morale. Stop torturing yourself. Lots of people live without kids and are happy. That's normal too. Don't you want to have a child, your own son or daughter? Wouldn't you? I want, of course, like any other human being, to continue the race. It's an innate instinct, but not at such a cost. Even more, I want to live happily, and for you, my wife, to be happy too. That's my dream. Maybe it's time we accept the situation, let go of our unfulfilled hopes, and move on with our lives. I definitely want a baby, George. You're a man, you probably wouldn't understand. But if this is the way things are, what can we do? What can we do? You just have to accept it. I'll help you, George said. There are techniques, Madison said firmly. There are other ways to become parents. Lately, it's been worth monitoring orphanage websites. You don't realize how many orphans there are now, some still in the maternity hospital, some later being abandoned. There's one boy. No, George responded immediately. There are definitely no foster children. The man understood perfectly well what Madison was getting at: a foster child, the offspring of someone unknown. George had a prejudice against adoption. Neighbors Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason are good people, kind and smiling. They were always attentive to the local kids and candy treat them, and let them play with their dog, and even sincerely interested in the affairs of the neighborhood children. It was especially pleasant, by the way, but they had no children of their own. George's mother and other neighbors often sighed about it. What good parents Mason and Carolyn would have made, but God didn't give it to them. Too bad. May. And then they did have a baby, a chubby little boy named Stephen, about 4 years old. George was surprised. He already understood then that at first children are very small. They do not walk, do not speak. They are carried in a stroller. But this one was so big at once. Aunt Carolyn herself explained to the local kids that Stephen was a boy from the orphanage. How it happens that babies are left without parents, and some are lucky enough to be taken into a family. George was happy for Stephen even then. He was very lucky indeed. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason are the best parents you can dream of. The boys have taken over Stephen's care. The girls babysat him. The boys took him to their games. Of course, in all things giving in to the little guy. And at first, everyone seemed to like Stephen. And then the kid started to grow up and began to manifest in him qualities that at first simply caused rejection, and then grew into something terrible, ugly, unimaginable. Simply put, Stephen became a monster. In first grade, he started smoking. That's when he was first caught stealing. Stephen did not want to sit quietly in class, hit and insulted children, walked around the classroom instead of sitting at his desk. The teacher couldn't do anything with him. Stephen swore profanities, even though Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason were intelligent people. His foster mother and father were nothing to him. George still remembered how Stephen's parents ran around the yard at night looking for their wayward son. The neighborhood boys helped them. And then there's more. Stephen got mixed up with a bad crowd. He skipped school, smoked, even started drinking when he was only a 5th grader. Theft, vagrancy. The adults often discussed the situation, and all agreed that genes were to blame. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason were portrayed in neighborhood conversations as innocent martyrs who had shouldered the burden for nothing. They were really good parents, loved Stephen, did a lot with him. But the power of genes. Even then, George realized that blood is not water, and that even the most correct upbringing cannot always correct the code that was written by nature for generations. Stephen soon found himself in a prison for juvenile delinquents, maimed someone in a street fight. Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason tried to get him out, even sold the apartment. In exchange for a spacious 3-bedroom, they bought a tiny and old house somewhere on the outskirts of town and moved in. So George didn't know what happened to their family next, but assumed that nothing good could be there anymore, unless Aunt Carolyn and Uncle Mason finally got rid of Stephen. And now, when Madison started talking about foster children, George, of course, remembered his neighbor. No, he was not going to go along with that. Madison did not fully accept his choice. His wife periodically tried to change George's mind, gave seemingly reasonable arguments, talked about positive examples. Only George was adamant. He didn't want him and Madison to turn from happy, beautiful, and healthy people into something like Uncle Mason and Aunt Carolyn, so thin, pale, and reserved. No way. Over time, Madison seemed to settle down. She found her purpose in something else. The woman now traveled to orphanages and helped poor, destitute children. It was charity. At one orphanage, she set up a playroom, and at another, a backyard playground with swings and slides. Madison would find out what the problems were in one or the other institution and solve them. Somewhere there weren't enough babysitters, somewhere the roof was leaking, somewhere the students were wearing old, outdated clothes. Madison not only closed the priority needs of orphanages, but also did something more organized directly in the orphanage's circles and sections, so that the orphans could find themselves to show their talents, arranged for children's fancy holidays. Madison got like-minded people. The woman felt almost happy, although she had no children of her own, but she gave joy and warmth to 1,000 strangers' disadvantaged children. Madison's activities were even written about in newspapers, filmed commercials. George was happy for his wife. Finally, she found herself, realized her maternal instinct in such an interesting way. It was good for everyone. The man himself sometimes took part in the actions, and now he called his wife nothing but the good fairy. Madison laughed and said that she liked the former title Queen better. Something of the former cold and unyielding Queen Madison in her still remained. And yet the wife has changed a lot. Became much softer, more tolerant, calmer. She often talked to George about the babies. You could see that her heart ached for each of them. But thankfully, Madison never spoke of adoption again. George thought his life was now set for many years to come. Except that fate threw him a test again, which he failed miserably. Vanessa was one of his assistants who served as his secretary. A young, dazzlingly beautiful woman who looked like a photo model from a glossy magazine. George himself didn't realize how it happened. He and his team were celebrating another successful project of some kind at the restaurant. Madison wasn't there, she had just left for another city on business. Vanessa asked the chief to dance. George saw her huge mermaid eyes for the first time. So close they looked like two green pools. Just stunning eyes of some kind. George couldn't resist. How was it even possible to be sympathized with such a beautiful girl? They went to Vanessa's rented apartment and spent the night. In the morning, George had no regrets, strangely enough. On the contrary, he felt happy around a beautiful woman. Anyway, they became lovers. Vanessa was just perfect, beautiful, unassuming, passionate. She understood that their relationship was a secret and did not seem to claim anything at first, and then began to talk about love, the development of their romance, and even about divorce. George didn't understand himself. He was physically attracted to Vanessa. He was dizzy with her green eyes, her slightly husky voice, her scent, her light blonde hair. But Madison, she was his soulmate. George, being a psychologist, couldn't make sense of himself. Could this really be possible? He fell in love with two women at once. All in all, it was a difficult time for George. Now he felt guilty in front of both of them, both his legal wife and Vanessa. The decision had to be made. But how could he do it so that he wouldn't regret it? And then Vanessa pulled a trump card out of her sleeve. Think about it. But I'll give you our own child. Madison won't be able to do that anymore. But me, George hesitated. Indeed, with Vanessa, they might have a strong, full-fledged family. But it was hard to leave Madison, too. She was already family, her own, loyal, dependable. Betray her again. And yet the decision was ripe. George chose Vanessa. He planned to remain friends with Madison, but the man was still hesitant to voice his decision to his wife. Vanessa was rushing him. She was understandable. She wanted certainty. George, however, continued to hesitate. And once again, fate intervened. Something happened that George never expected. One day, Madison said they needed to have a serious talk. The conversation took place that evening in the living room of a house too spacious for a family of two. George was nervous. He felt like Madison had found out everything about him and Vanessa, and was about to start asking him uncomfortable questions head-on. On the one hand, that would be better, at least it would finally be resolved. On the other hand, she wanted to present the situation to Madison in a different way. "I have some bad news for you," Madison began. George tensed. Here it comes. Only further, his wife told such a story that worries about the disclosure of the affair with Vanessa seemed to be nothing. "I'm sick, and I'm very sick. I've been diagnosed with an incurable blood disease. I just found out about it recently. It took a long time to get a diagnosis." "Why? Why didn't I tell you before?" Madison grinned. "I just didn't want to worry you too much. I thought it was just a vitamin deficiency or something. And then I got this scary diagnosis." "Is there really no cure?" George didn't want to believe what his wife was saying. It seemed that anything could be cured nowadays, if only there was money. And fortunately, they had the money. Madison shook her head sadly. She put her hands on George's shoulders. A soothing, warm gesture. She was also comforting him while in this state. Amazing. I don't believe you can't be helped. We'll fight. George was about to leave his wife, but he didn't want to lose her. Like this, permanently, completely and irrevocably. Madison meant a lot to him. She was his own person, his own loved one. He wouldn't give her up to some disease for anything. Remember years ago when you said we should accept the fact that we weren't going to have kids? Accept the situation. That's what I'm doing now. We just have to accept it, Madison said. George shook his head negatively. It wasn't the same, he countered. Again, the tests at the clinic, the consultations with medical luminaries from all over the world. Only now the battle was not for the dream of parenthood, but for Madison's life. George wasn't about to give up. He studied a lot of information about his wife's disease. Now he better understood the situation. Yes, the disease was indeed very insidious and dangerous. Most patients, once diagnosed, died within a year. But there were also exceptions, cases of miraculous healing, and George hoped for that. Of course, he hadn't told Vanessa about Madison's illness. He didn't want to break bad news to someone in that condition. Vanessa agreed with George's decision. She said she was willing to wait until Madison's situation was resolved one way or another. Vanessa was even supportive of George, seeing how hard it was for him. She knew Madison meant a lot to him, but she wasn't jealous the perfect life partner. Madison was getting worse and worse, despite her extensive treatment, and she was slowly fading away. George cared for her on his own, spending her last days. It was hard, realizing that the fight was lost. The man still couldn't get over it. Madison, on the other hand, seemed to have accepted the situation and even calmed down. The woman quite consciously enjoyed every day, realizing that there was not much left. She met with friends, visited, as long as there was strength, beautiful and favorite places. George tried to accompany his wife everywhere, but he had a job and Vanessa needed some attention. Madison sometimes asked him to leave her alone. They talked a lot during this period. I'm grateful to fate for the fact that in my life there is a man like you. The woman smiled at her husband. You always understood me like no one else, felt my soul. That's worth a lot, George said, squeezing his wife's hand and feeling guilty again. It was a good thing Madison didn't know about Vanessa after all. What luck that he didn't have time to reveal his cards in front of his wife. All he needed was a negative experience at such a difficult time. I think about that sometimes, too. It's lucky we met, Madison replied sincerely. You're a unique person, the closest to me, she said paradoxically. These words were also true. George understood perfectly well that he was losing a dear person, a close friend, and there would never be a warmer and deeper relationship in his life. Madison left at dawn in her sleep. Quiet and peaceful, an easy end. As many people said later, a nurse slept in the room with her. Her frightened scream woke George, and he knew immediately. The ambulance, the police, filling out paperwork, preparing to say goodbye. It was all a blur. George still couldn't accept the fact that Madison was gone. She was gone. Not anywhere. Where could it all suddenly disappear to? Her sharp mind, her love of children, her determination, her courage. How is that possible? Peter was supported at this difficult moment by Vanessa. She honestly tried to reassure the man, but Vanessa had never felt him as subtly as Madison did. She said things that hurt the man even more. It's all for the best. At least she doesn't have any pain now. And the situation worked itself out. You didn't even have to say anything. George shook his head. How could losing someone like Madison be for the best? Vanessa just doesn't understand anything. There were even words like, Think about it, you get all the kids now, you didn't have any, so you're the only heir. And in a divorce, everything would have to be divided in half. George looked at Vanessa in such a way that she immediately realized what a terrible foolishness she had said. The girl tried to remedy the situation. Well, I mean, she got sick anyway. It would have happened anyway. And this is such a benefit. Just shut up, George asked. People came to say goodbye, lots of people. Madison's co-workers and friends. And those she had helped over the years. They came up to George, offering condolences, saying nice things about Madison, and George was proud of her, proud of his wonderful wife. Desperately regretted that he too rarely told Madison how wonderful she was, and yet he was glad that sometimes he did say it. It had been several days since Madison had left, which George still couldn't believe. Then a woman called him, introduced herself as a notary, made an appointment. I invite you for the reading of the will. George was surprised. He didn't know Madison had made a will. Probably she had decided to make it easier for him to receive the inheritance, took care of everything before. Vanessa volunteered to go with George. It would probably be kind of inappropriate if it was okay with you. You're in that state right now. You need support. Vanessa cut Vanessa off. George nodded. She was probably right. He shouldn't even be driving right now. He couldn't even keep his head straight. It would be good to have someone more sensible around. And now George was sitting in the kitchen smoking out the window. It was early morning. Vanessa was still asleep. George was the one with insomnia, unfortunately, and he wanted to go to sleep and see Madison. Maybe even talk to her. George sighed, putting the kettle on, needing to drink strong, hot, black coffee. Maybe that would cheer her up a little. This head felt heavy. George poured the steaming coffee into a cup, sat down at the table again, and thought. He thought back to Madison. Their life, her dreams and plans and desires. Yeah, the world had lost a lot of things. Madison had done so much good for people, for underprivileged children. Vanessa was even seriously afraid to hear from the notary that Madison had bequeathed all her money to some orphanage or children's home. George was distracted from his musings by Vanessa. She flew into the kitchen, anxious, disheveled, but still unrealistically beautiful. We're late, announced the girl in a voice shaking with excitement. I overslept. I don't know why you're sitting there like a statue. George, as if out of a daze, came out, took a sip of coffee that had long since cooled, and began to pack. They were on time, though they got to the office when they were still 5 minutes away from the meeting with the notary. They were lucky no traffic, no accidents on the way. Vanessa looked luxurious, even too luxurious for such an occasion. Her tight, dark gray dress emphasized the graceful curves of her figure, her light blonde hair falling beautifully over her fragile shoulders. But George had no time to admire his companion. He wanted to go back 5 years, when Vanessa hadn't been in his life, and Madison hadn't been sick. Come on in, Vanessa said. She turned around on the porch and turned to George, trying to hide her irritation. He grinned. He knew his mistress was eager to know what he'd inherited from Madison. It was a little unpleasant. As they entered the notary's office, an old woman dressed very modestly, even poorly, hurried in. She looked like a beggar. And a girl, lovely, charming girl of about 10 years old. Wavy blonde hair, big gray eyes. George stared and couldn't figure out who this child reminded him of, except whose relative Madison was. Maybe George had met this little girl once before. Just in case, the man politely and kindly said hello to both the grandmother and her granddaughter. The old woman answered cautiously, warily, even grudgingly. But the girl smiled broadly at George. That made him feel a little brighter. Vanessa looked at the old woman and the girl as if they were adversaries, spiders in a jar. She obviously hadn't expected to see them here. "Sit down," smiled the notary, dressed in an elegant pantsuit. Everyone present followed her advice. "I thought only the deceased's loved ones would be here," Vanessa said, raising her thin eyebrows. "Those who appear in the will." "That's right," the notary nodded. Vanessa's eyebrows rose even higher. Whether out of surprise or indignation, she threw another contemptuous glance at the older woman and the girl. "Are we expecting anyone else?" Vanessa asked, putting her foot on her leg. "No, everyone is here now." The notary acted professionally and did not react to the negativity of the cranky visitor. She stood up, offered condolences to those present, and said a few warm words about Madison. Then she took out of a large envelope a double-folded sheet of paper, both sides written in Madison's neat handwriting. "This letter is for you." The notary handed the sheets to George. "You can read it here. Anyway, this is where the deceased explains everything to you." George clutched the letter with both hands. He couldn't wait to be alone to read Madison's last message. There was no doubt in his mind that something very important was written there. The notary then began to read the will aloud, as was her custom. As George had expected, a considerable amount of money was bequeathed by Madison to a foundation that supported orphans. Vanessa cringed when she heard the size of the transfer. But George was getting all the real estate, cars, and even the business. The man, however, had no idea what he was going to do with a chain of attires. He never really got into his wife's business. But it seemed that this business was already quite a well-oiled mechanism. It worked like clockwork on its own. Madison managed to adjust the firm in such a way that everything functioned without her direct participation and control. And then the notary said something that made Vanessa jump on the spot like a scalded woman. Madison had left a large sum of money to a girl named Danielle, the same girl who was now sitting across from George with her elderly grandmother. Danielle hadn't even noticed the amount. She was too young to realize how much money it was. The old lady, however, realized it. She shuddered, turned pale, then even blanched. An obliging woman notary immediately offered the agitated visitor a glass of water. "Who the hell are these people?" Vanessa was indignant. "We don't know them. Are they her relatives?" "Well, they're obviously not first cousins. Otherwise, the deceased's husband would have known them." "What's going on?" "It's all done by law," confirmed the notary. "It's the will of the deceased. A person can name whoever they want in their will. It doesn't have to be relatives." "Who are you?" Vanessa addressed the old lady directly. "You're frauds? Don't get your hopes up. You'll get nothing. I can prove that Madison was incompetent when she signed the will. I mean, she's a sick person. And you probably took advantage of her condition?" Danielle looked at Vanessa, not with fear, no, more like disappointment. George noticed that at the very beginning of the meeting the girl had admired Vanessa. Of course, she's so beautiful, just a photo model. But now the idol was turning into a monster. Screaming, petty, greedy. "Calm down," George said irritably over his shoulder. He himself was not surprised at this outcome. The man realized that his wife was sure to give some of what she had accumulated in her life to charity. The girl and the grandmother are obviously very poor. Madison must have wanted to help them, but why them? And with such a large sum of money. "I'm sorry, I'm not protesting in any way," George said to the old woman. "If my wife has decided so, it's the right thing to do. But I was just wondering, how did you meet Madison? Why did she choose you?" The old woman looked George carefully in the eye. That look. There was judgment in it. And for some reason, pain. "You know," she said in a shaky voice, "read the letter and you'll understand. Danielle, we have to go." The girl slid off the chair with relief. What was happening clearly began to strain her anger and wanted to leave this place with an oppressive, heavy atmosphere. Let's read the letter, Vanessa demanded as the door slammed shut behind her. At least we'll know who they are. Vanessa, you see, I have to read it alone, Vanessa said, her lips tightening resentfully. George was sitting in an old coffee shop he frequented as a student. He had chosen the farthest table against the wall behind the racks of houseplants. It was quiet, peaceful, cozy, and lonely. There was no better place to finally read a letter. Vanessa was not so easy to get rid of. She wanted to be with George when he began to study Madison's message. She even had to raise her voice at her. And now George was here alone with that very letter. His heart was pounding so hard it felt like it was going to jump out of his chest. I wondered what Madison was trying to tell him. Well, hello, George. That's how the message began. If you're reading this letter, I'm sadly gone. That's a shame, of course. Life is a good thing. Anyway, it's already happened. Then it's time for you to know everything. I love you. You know you love me too. I'm sure you do. Despite your occasional flings. I know about Vanessa too, by the way. I wish I could have seen her face when she heard how much money I bequeathed to Danielle. It must have been fun. George shuddered. So Madison knew about Vanessa. What a nightmare. And he had been putting so much effort into not upsetting his wife. All the energy that should have been going into fighting the disease. Don't think I'm upset about Vanessa. No, I'm not. I get it. You're the kind of man who can't live his whole life with one woman. A creative person who needs inspiration, a muse. George thought about it. Wow. Madison understood him better than he did. Vanessa is just such a muse. But I never, ever doubted that you loved me, didn't I? You were there for me during a difficult time in my life. Supportive, caring, that's priceless. I wasn't so scared with you. You fought so fiercely for me when I knew I was done, when I had resigned myself to it. But you didn't give up until the end. You have no idea what it all meant to me. Thank you for that. And know that you're my nearest and dearest. George felt tears welling up in his eyes. The sharp pain of losing Madison pierced his heart again. Yes, he felt the same way. Madison. She had been someone near and dear to his heart. They were more than just husband and wife. Soulmates. Soulmates. George would go to great lengths for her, and she would do the same for him. Now let's talk about Danielle. She's a wonderful girl, isn't she? I'm sure you've seen her already. She's so sweet. Does she remind you of anyone? I mean, she's a lot like someone who's not a stranger to both of us. I met her a long time ago, 3 years ago. She was just a little girl, a first grader. You know, I help orphanages. Danielle's an orphan too, but at least she has a great grandmother. But she and her grandmother live very poorly. And at that time, things got so bad that the old lady had to put her granddaughter in an orphanage. It was hard for both of them, but the orphanage fed and clothed her. But the great-grandmother couldn't always do that. I saw Danielle at the New Year's Eve performance. The children had prepared a big concert. The girl's great-grandmother was in the audience. She was crying into a soaked handkerchief. A sad sight. The girl attracted my attention first by her appearance. The little beauty reminded me of someone, only I did not immediately realize who. Have you finally figured it out? Or not yet? I asked the teachers about the fate of the little girl and was horrified. A 7-year-old girl had to go through things that not every adult can endure. Danielle had everything to be happy about at first. She lived in a small provincial town with her mom, grandparents. She didn't have a daddy, but it's not uncommon today, is it? A lot of kids grow up without fathers. It's not surprising. Danielle was everyone's favorite. The young mother was very fond of Danielle. It was said that she gave birth to a girl by a man she loved very much, and he abandoned them. He didn't want to be a father, he was scared. Good thing Danielle's mom had good parents. Of course, they did not abandon her daughter in a difficult situation, accepted, supported, and when she gave birth, they helped the young mother with her baby. They lived like that, and the four of them. Grandmother was engaged in the household, grandfather earned money to feed the increased family, and her mother was studying at the university by correspondence, because now she had a baby in her arms. Danielle grew up a healthy and obedient child. That's what they call a gift child. Her mother adored her. Her grandmother and grandfather doted on her. There was no money in the family, but adults spoiled Danielle as much as possible. Danielle's mother had a dream to go to the sea with her daughter, show the little girl high waves, walk with her along the coast, breathe fresh sea air. When the girl was 4 years old, the grandfather decided to fulfill the wish of his daughter and granddaughter. He saved up some money and planned a trip to the sea in the family car. It was cheaper that way. At first, everything went just fine. The family spent a wonderful vacation on the seashore. All the dreams of Danielle's mother came true in walks on the beach, and a southern tan, and beautiful bright pictures. But on the way back home on the highway, there was a terrible accident. The car lost control and overturned several times, plunging into a ditch. Already later, the cause was established. It turned out that my grandfather had a heart attack right behind the wheel. A long trip, heat, plenty of impressions, a sudden change of climate. A lot of factors came together. This is the result. The driver himself was almost unhurt, but he was not taken to the hospital. The cause of death was a heart attack. His wife died on the spot from her injuries. The daughter, Danielle's mom, was taken to the hospital, but her condition was very serious. The young woman was placed in intensive care. So what happened to the youngest passenger? It's a miracle, but Danielle survived. She got off with a couple of abrasions and a fright, but not a light fright. The girl cried out at night for a long time and often dreamed about this terrible accident. The little girl was taken to her only close relative, great-grandmother Danielle. She had lost her son-in-law and daughter in the accident. Her granddaughter lay in the hospital dying. But the old woman pulled herself together for the sake of great-granddaughter Danielle. After all, in this difficult period, needed near a sensible adult person, able to take on all the cares of the girl. The mother of the little girl was in a serious condition, but there was still hope for her salvation. For treatment required money, and a lot of it. So the old lady had to sell the apartment where the once happy family lived. She reasoned as follows: now the main thing to pull Danielle's mom, and money, apartments, unlike human life, it is a matter of gain. When her granddaughter gets on her feet, then she'll earn money. Until then, they can live in a one-bedroom apartment they will somehow fit. This old lady was wrong about the three of them. The treatment didn't work. Danielle's mother wasn't saved. The girl was left an orphan. She had no one in the world but her old great-grandmother. No, there was a father somewhere, but how to find him? The old woman did not know the details of her granddaughter's history. She had no idea where Danielle's father might be. And did he need a daughter if he had already abandoned her? There was nothing to do, so the great-grandmother began to raise her little granddaughter alone. It was hard. At such a respectable age, to keep up with a small child, oh, how not easy. And as for the financial side of things, it was a disaster. Danielle's great-grandmother's pension was meager. Her health was also poor, and she couldn't get a part-time job. Then there was Danielle's allowance. It had to be registered and confirmed every year, and it cost the old woman a lot of labor. So much paperwork to collect, so many offices to run through. But the old woman tried, ran, collected so that her great-granddaughter Danielle had at least this minimum allowance. And as if somehow the old woman and the girl lived poorly, saving on everything, already exhausted but kept afloat. And then came the time when Danielle had to go to school. And that was it. The family budget couldn't keep up with the new spending. Great-grandmother got her granddaughter into school, even went into debt. And after that, times were very bad when even bread was not enough every day. That's why the great-grandmother, with a broken heart, made the decision to place Danielle in an orphanage. temporarily, due to her difficult financial situation. And then there was this concert. The stage I saw Danielle, I was hooked by her looks, and the story began. Danielle looks a lot like you. Did you notice same eyes, same look, same brow sweep? And the mole on her cheek, the same mole, exactly the same. I looked at the girl and realized there's no such thing as coincidence. And then it turned out it really wasn't a coincidence. George took his eyes off the letter. How had he not realized that? Danielle really did look a lot like him. It was not without reason that the girl seemed familiar to him. He saw almost the same features in the mirror every day. I started digging deeper. I even had to hire detectives. And I found out, well, don't fall out of your chair or whatever you're sitting on. Danielle is your daughter. I purposely withheld her mother's name before, or you would have figured it out. And I like to keep things intriguing. You know, it's more fun that way. Danielle's mom is Charlotte. Yeah. The same Charlotte you left behind when she was expecting the baby. George wanted to object. It was important to him to prove to Madison that he hadn't abandoned Charlotte. It was the circumstances. Her parents had decided everything for them, sent their daughter for an abortion so that she could study and build a career. And he himself, George, was ready to get married. They even had time to apply to the registry office. Did Madison left thinking that her spouse was such a mean man? That's what great-grandmother Danielle told me, that you left a pregnant Charlotte. Scared, didn't want to be a father, didn't want to take on the responsibility, George thought. Something didn't seem right to me right away. So of course I decided to do some more digging. I found out that you applied to the registry office, but the wedding didn't take place. Why? I tracked down Charlotte's best friend. She told me. The girl's father was against the wedding. He did send his daughter to hospital at first, but it turned out there was nothing she could do. All the deadlines had been missed. Charlotte seemed to love you very much. She begged her parents to let her be your wife, especially since you'd already applied. But my father was adamant. He felt that as a wife and mother, his daughter would never graduate from university. And decided so Charlotte gives birth, lives with her parents, they help with the baby, and she finishes her studies, builds a career, and then does what she wants. Except that then never came. Charlotte, yes, she studied, of course. But the accident happened shortly after she got her degree. Who knows, maybe if she'd stayed alive, she would have found you sooner. She probably would have. Well, Danielle's great-grandmother didn't know who the girl's father was, so she couldn't find you if she wanted to. That's the story. If it wasn't for chance, Danielle would still be without a father. Now, I hope you understand why I left her this much money. She's your daughter. I had to help that little girl, but it wasn't just money, I hope. I think I've given her something much more valuable. I've found her a father. I know how you long for a child, a baby of your own. And here you have a teenage daughter. Interesting, with her own opinions and personality. She's great, George, and she needs you very, very much. And you need her. Just do me a favor. Don't make Vanessa the girl's stepmother. She'll make her life a nightmare. Find someone else. A more empathetic and understanding woman. You're worth more than that. And so does Danielle. I believe you're the closest thing to each other. You'll be reunited and live happily ever after. I wish I could be there for you. Love you and kisses. Take care of each other. George finished reading. Only then he noticed that his hands were trembling. As a postscript, Madison had left Danielle's address and a link to a DNA test, which it turned out this amazing woman had managed to conduct secretly from her husband. George had no doubts about the result of that test. A light, fresh breeze blew in from the sea. It was too cold for swimming, but it was a pleasure to walk along the shore. George walked along the sand, holding his daughter's hand. It was hard to get used to, but it felt good to say to someone, "That's my daughter." George, we've missed so many years. Now we're catching up, he thought. They talked a lot, traveled a lot, talked about everything in the world. George felt absolutely happy, and he knew exactly who he had to thank for that happiness: Madison. Amazing, unique, intelligent, sensitive, kind. Sometimes George thought she was somewhere nearby, looking at him and Danielle and smiling contentedly.